Good evening. Perhaps you have spent years searching for answers in books, in teachings, in the words of others. Perhaps you have looked everywhere except the one place where true wisdom has always been waiting. Tonight, we explore wisdom and understanding, one of the deepest treasures in Buddhist philosophy. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. Through 20 stories from ancient monasteries, simple villages, and quiet forests, we will discover that wisdom is not something we acquire, but something we uncover. That understanding comes not from gathering more knowledge, but from seeing more clearly. Let your breath become soft and easy. Notice the gentle rise and fall of your chest. Let each exhale carry away whatever weight you've been holding. Perhaps you are here carrying questions without answers. Perhaps you are exhausted from trying to figure everything out. Perhaps you just need to rest in not knowing for a while. These teachings have held millions through similar nights. They create a safe space for whatever you are feeling. These stories come from Buddhist traditions spanning 2,000 years across Japan, China, Tibet, and Vietnam. They carry wisdom refined through countless generations. They have guided seekers through confusion into clarity, through ignorance into understanding. Rest now in complete peace. You are safe. You are held. Let us begin. The tea master's empty cup. In old Kyoto, during the time when cherry blossoms fell like snow through temple gardens, there lived a famous Zen master named Nanin. His reputation for wisdom had spread throughout all of Japan. Scholars traveled from distant provinces to study with him. Wealthy merchants offered him gold. Even the emperor himself had sent messengers requesting his counsel. One afternoon, as cicadas sang in the garden and sunlight filtered through paper screens, a university professor arrived at Nanin's humble dwelling. This professor was renowned throughout the land. He had studied philosophy in China and India. He had read every Buddhist text available. His students considered him the most learned man in the region. The professor knelt before Nanin, though his posture conveyed more pride than reverence. He began speaking immediately, his words tumbling forth like a river in flood. He spoke of his years of study, his collection of rare manuscripts, his theories about enlightenment and the nature of mind. He referenced ancient texts in Sanskrit and Pali, dropping the names of famous scholars he had debated. Nanin listened in silence, his face peaceful as still water. After some time, he gestured for the professor to sit more comfortably. The old master began preparing tea, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The tea room smelled of matcha and aged wood. Light from the garden cast soft patterns on the floor. Nanin placed a ceramic cup before his guest and began pouring tea from a small pot. The green liquid filled the cup slowly. Steam rose in delicate wisps. The professor continued talking, explaining his understanding of Buddhist philosophy, his interpretations of various koans, his theories about the relationship between knowledge and wisdom. The tea reached the rim of the cup. Nanin kept pouring. Liquid spilled over the edge, pooling on the low table, dripping onto the tatami mat. Still, the old master poured, his expression unchanged, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. The professor's words faltered. He watched the tea overflow, spreading across the dark wood, staining the woven mat beneath. Finally, he could contain himself no longer. "Master, stop, the cup is full. No more will go in." Nanin set down the pot. He looked at his guest with eyes that held both kindness and something sharper, something that cut through pretense like a sword through silk. Like this cup, the master said quietly, you are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you wisdom when you are already so full? Until you empty your cup, how can you receive anything new? The professor sat very still. The tea dripped. Cicadas sang. Something in his chest tightened, then released. For the first time in many years, he had nothing to say. This teaching shows us something profound about the nature of wisdom. The professor had accumulated vast knowledge. He could quote sutras from memory, debate philosophy with the finest minds, analyze Buddhist concepts with scholarly precision. Yet all this learning had become an obstacle rather than a path. True wisdom requires emptiness. Not the emptiness of ignorance, but the emptiness of openness. Not the absence of knowledge, but the willingness to set aside what we think we know so we can see clearly what is actually here. Consider how this plays out in our modern lives. When our teenage child tries to tell us about their struggles, and we interrupt with our own teenage stories, certain we already know what they are going through. We are the professor. Our cup is too full to receive what they are actually saying. When we approach every new situation at work, convinced we already know the best solution. When we do not listen to the perspectives of others, because we have decided we understand everything that matters. We are the professor. Our cup overflows with our own certainty. When we read spiritual teachings, looking only for confirmation of what we already believe. When we dismiss anything that challenges our existing worldview. When we use our knowledge as a shield rather than as a doorway. We are the professor. We are full, and therefore we cannot be filled. The paradox of wisdom is this: it grows not from accumulation but from release. Not from grasping but from opening. Not from being full but from being empty. Think of a jar filled with rocks. You cannot add water because the rocks take up all the space. But empty out some rocks, and suddenly there is room for water. Empty out more, and there is room for even finer things, for sand, for air itself. This is what Nanin was teaching. This is what the professor needed to learn. This is what we all need to remember when we are so certain, so full, so convinced of our own understanding that we cannot see what is right in front of us. Wisdom whispers. Knowledge shouts. Wisdom invites. Knowledge insists. Wisdom opens. Knowledge closes. Notice your breath now, moving in and out like gentle waves. Feel your body beginning to settle. Let yourself arrive fully in this moment. We continue with a story that takes us deeper into the nature of true seeing. The blind men and the elephant. Long ago, in a kingdom near the foothills of the Himalayas, a wise king gathered together 6 blind men. These men had never seen anything in their lives. They knew the world only through touch, sound, and smell. The king, known for his skill in teaching, led these men to where his royal elephant stood, massive and patient in the warm morning sun. The elephant swayed slightly, its great ears fanning the air. It smelled of hay and earth, and the musk particular to its kind. The blind men approached, hands outstretched, tentative yet curious. The first man reached out, and his palm met the elephant's broad, wrinkled side. The surface felt like a great wall, textured and warm, extending beyond his reach in both directions. "I understand now," he declared. "An elephant is like a wall, solid, flat, and immovable." The second blind man, approaching from a different angle, grasped one of the elephant's tusks. He ran his fingers along its smooth curve, feeling how it tapered to a point. "No, you are mistaken," he said. "An elephant is like a spear, hard, smooth, and dangerous at one end." The third man's seeking hands found the elephant's trunk. He felt it move, serpentine and flexible, capable of curling and grasping. "You are both wrong," he announced. "An elephant is like a snake. It is long and flexible and moves with its own will." The fourth blind man, standing near the elephant's front leg, wrapped his arms around what he could of that massive pillar. His hands could not meet around its circumference. The skin was thick and textured like bark. "How can you all be so blind?" he said, not noticing his own irony. "An elephant is like a tree trunk, cylindrical, strong, rooted to the earth." The fifth man reached up and grabbed the elephant's ear. The thin membrane moved in his hand, flapping gently. It was wide and flat and flexible, nothing like what the others had described. "Nonsense," he said. "An elephant is like a fan, thin, wide, and able to move air." The sixth blind man, approaching from behind, seized the elephant's tail. He felt the rope-like quality, the coarse hairs at the end. "You are all confused," he said. "An elephant is like a rope, narrow, flexible, with a brush at the end." The king listened as the blind men began to argue. Each one insisted his understanding was correct. Each one was certain the others were wrong. Each one could describe in perfect detail what he had felt, could defend his position with unwavering conviction. Their voices rose. The argument grew heated. One man said another was a fool. Another accused his companion of lying. They began to shout, each defending his own limited perception as if it were the whole truth. The elephant stood quietly through all of this, patient and vast, completely itself, regardless of their descriptions. Finally, the king spoke. His voice was gentle but clear, cutting through the argument like a bell through fog. "You are all correct," he said, "and you are all mistaken. Each of you has grasped one part of the truth, but none of you has grasped the whole elephant." The blind men fell silent. The king continued. "The elephant is indeed like a wall, and like a spear, and like a snake, and like a tree, and like a fan, and like a rope. It is all of these things, and it is none of these things. It is simply an elephant, which is larger and more complex than any single comparison can capture." This story reminds us that our understanding is always partial, always limited by our perspective, our experience, our particular angle of approach. We touch one small part of reality and believe we have grasped the whole. We see one facet of truth and assume we see it all. In our daily lives, this pattern repeats endlessly. Two people experience the same event and come away with completely different understandings. Not because one is right and one is wrong, but because they each grasped different aspects of what occurred. Think about political arguments. How certain we are that we see clearly, that our understanding is correct, that those who disagree must be either stupid or dishonest. We are the blind men arguing about the elephant, each touching one part of a complex reality, each certain, each limited. Or consider relationships. Your partner does something that upsets you, You interpret their action based on your history, your wounds, your particular sensitivity. They meant something entirely different. Neither of you is lying. You are each touching different parts of the same elephant. You are each describing truly what you feel. Yet you are describing entirely different things. The wisdom here is not to stop trusting our perceptions. We need our perceptions. They are real. They are valid. The blind men were not wrong about what they felt. The man who touched the tusk truly felt something spear-like. That was his genuine experience. The wisdom is to hold our perceptions lightly, to recognize that what we see is real but partial. What we understand is true but incomplete. What we grasp is solid but limited. When we argue with others, insisting they must be wrong because their experience differs from ours, we are arguing with reality itself. We are saying the elephant cannot be like both a rope and a tree trunk. But it can. It is. It contains multitudes beyond what any single perspective can capture. Wisdom means recognizing the limits of our own seeing. It means staying curious about what we have not yet perceived. It means asking, not, am I right, but rather, what else is true that I cannot yet see? It means approaching life the way the blind men might have approached the elephant if they were wise. Each sharing what they found, each listening with genuine interest to what others discovered, each recognizing that together, by combining their different perceptions, they might build a more complete understanding. This is the beginning of real wisdom. Not the certainty that comes from thinking we know everything, but the humility that comes from recognizing how much we cannot see. Your breath continues, steady and calm. Your body is becoming heavier, more relaxed. Everything can wait until tomorrow. Let us continue our journey into the heart of understanding. The farmer and the wild horse. In a small village on the edge of a vast grassland in ancient China, there lived a farmer. He was neither wealthy nor poor, neither famous nor forgotten. He lived simply with his son, working their modest land, tending their few animals. Among their possessions, the most valuable was a strong and beautiful horse. One morning, the farmer and his son woke to discover the horse had broken through the fence during the night. It had run away to join the wild herds that roamed the distant hills. The horse was gone. The neighbors gathered when they heard the news. They shook their heads with sympathy. "How terrible," they said. "What bad luck. That horse was worth a fortune. This is a disaster for you." They meant well, these neighbors. They genuinely felt sorry for the farmer's loss. The farmer listened to their condolences. He nodded slowly. Then he said only, "Maybe. We shall see." His response puzzled the neighbors. How could he be so calm? The loss was obvious. The misfortune was clear. They went home shaking their heads, thinking perhaps the shock had affected his mind. A week passed. Then one evening, the lost horse returned. But it did not return alone. Behind it came 6 wild horses, magnificent and strong, their coats gleaming in the setting sun. The farmer's son quickly closed the gate, and suddenly the family owned not 1 horse but 7. The neighbors hurried over when they saw what had happened. "How wonderful," they exclaimed. "What incredible good fortune. You are so lucky. This is marvelous." They slapped the farmer on the back, congratulated him on his great fortune. The farmer received their excitement with the same calm he had received their sympathy. "Maybe," he said again. "We shall see." The neighbors went home thinking the farmer was a strange man indeed. Could he not see his obvious good fortune? The following week, the farmer's son began training the wild horses. He worked with a particularly spirited stallion, strong and fast, but unaccustomed to riders. The young man was skilled, but the horse was wild. During one training session, the stallion bucked violently. The farmer's son was thrown hard to the ground. He landed badly. His leg broke in 2 places, a serious injury. Once again, the neighbors gathered. They looked at the son, his leg splintered and wrapped, his face tight with pain. "How terrible," they said to the farmer. "What misfortune! Your only son, injured so badly, and right before planting season when you need his help most. This is truly awful." Their sympathy was genuine. The farmer tended to his son. He made him comfortable. He prepared medicine from herbs. And when the neighbors expressed their sorrow, he responded as he had before. "Maybe. We shall see." By now the neighbors thought him quite mad. How could a broken leg be anything but bad luck? 2 weeks later, military officers came through the village. The empire was at war. They were conscripting all able-bodied young men to serve in the army. The war was brutal. Few who went ever returned. The officers went from house to house, taking every healthy son, every young man strong enough to fight. When they came to the farmer's house, they saw his son lying there, legs still healing, unable to walk. They looked at him and moved on. He was useless to them. They left him behind. All through the village, families wept as their sons were taken away. But the farmer's son remained home, safe with his father. The neighbors, those whose sons had been taken, came to the farmer. Their eyes were red from crying. They looked at his son, injured but present, alive and safe. They no longer said anything about luck or fortune. They simply wept. The farmer put his hand on the shoulder of one grieving neighbor. "Maybe," he said gently. "We shall see." This teaching reveals something profound about wisdom and understanding. The neighbors kept thinking they understood what was happening. They were certain they could see whether events were good or bad, fortunate or unfortunate. They judged every occurrence immediately, declaring it to be one thing or another. The farmer knew better. He understood that he could not see the whole pattern. He recognized that what appears as misfortune today might reveal itself as blessing tomorrow. What seems like a gift might become a burden. What looks like the end of the story might just be the middle. True wisdom lies not in judging every event as it occurs, but in recognizing our inability to see the complete picture. Life unfolds in patterns too complex for our limited perspective to fully grasp. What we think is the whole story is usually just one chapter. Consider how we react when something goes wrong at work. We get passed over for a promotion, and we are devastated. We are certain this is terrible news. We cannot see that this job was going to demand 80-hour weeks and destroy our health. We cannot see that a better opportunity will emerge in 3 months. We see only what appears to be, right now, a misfortune. Or we get exactly what we wanted. We land the relationship we have been seeking. We are certain this is wonderful. We cannot see that this person will betray us, or that we needed more time alone to heal, or that our dream was actually a fantasy that will not survive reality. The farmer's wisdom was not fatalism. He did not sit back and do nothing. He still tended to his son's injury. He still managed his horses. He still worked his land. But he did not pretend to know whether what was happening was ultimately good or bad. He understood something we often forget, that reality is too vast, too interconnected, too complex for us to judge correctly from our limited vantage point. What we call understanding is often just projection, just our current fear or hope painted onto events we cannot truly comprehend. Real wisdom says maybe. We shall see. Real wisdom holds space for mystery, for the unknown, for the possibility that things are not what they appear. Real wisdom knows that the story is not over, that patterns are still unfolding, that what seems like an ending might be a beginning. This does not mean we stop making choices. It means we make choices while acknowledging uncertainty. It means we act with our best judgment while remaining open to being surprised. It means we respond to what is, without pretending we know what it means for tomorrow. Breathe slowly now. Let your shoulders drop just a little. Let your jaw soften. You are exactly where you need to be. Another story arrives to deepen our understanding. The student who could not learn, in a monastery high in the mountains of Tibet, where prayer flags snapped in the constant wind and the air thinned until each breath required intention. There lived a student named Chodak. He had come to the monastery burning with desire for enlightenment. His heart was pure. His dedication was absolute. Yet month after month, year after year, he could not seem to learn anything. When the master taught about emptiness, Chodak would nod enthusiastically. He would recite the teachings back perfectly. But when questioned more deeply, it became clear he had only memorized words. He had not grasped the meaning. When the master guided meditation practices, Chodak would sit with perfect posture for hours. He never complained, never shifted. Yet when asked about his experience, he could only describe physical sensations. He reported his legs hurt, his back ached, his mind wandered. He had not touched what lay beneath these surface experiences. The other students began to whisper. Some felt sorry for Chodak. Others felt frustrated, as if his slowness held them all back. A few were simply puzzled. How could someone try so hard and achieve so little? The master, an old lama who had spent 40 years in solitary retreat, watched Chodak with particular attention. He saw something the other students missed. One day, the master called Chodak to his simple room. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, early winter arriving in the high peaks. The room smelled of butter lamps and old wood. Prayer beads lay on a worn cushion. Chodak, the master said, his voice gentle. Tell me what you are trying to do here. I am trying to understand the teachings. Master, Chodak replied. I am trying to reach enlightenment. I am trying to become wise. I see, said the master. And how is this trying working for you? Chodak's face fell. Not well, master. I try very hard. I practice constantly. I memorize the teachings. I sit for hours in meditation. But I do not understand. Wisdom does not come to me. The master nodded slowly. He poured tea for them both, the liquid steaming in the cold room. Let me tell you a story, he said. Once, there was a man who wanted very badly to see the stars. He had heard they were beautiful, magnificent, worthy of awe. So every night, he went outside with a lantern. He held the lantern high and searched the sky for stars. But he could never find them. The sky remained dark, empty of the stars he sought so desperately. Chodak listened, confused. "But Master, the lantern." "Yes," the Master interrupted gently. "The lantern, the light he was using to search for stars, was the very thing preventing him from seeing them." Silence filled the small room. Outside, snow continued to fall, each flake finding its way to earth without effort, without trying. "You come here seeking wisdom," the Master continued, "but your very seeking pushes wisdom away. You try to understand, but understanding is not something achieved through effort. You grasp for enlightenment, but grasping is the opposite of enlightenment." "Then what should I do?" Chodak asked, and there was pain in his voice. "If trying does not work, if effort is wrong, what can I do?" "Nothing," the Master said. "Do nothing. Stop trying to understand. Stop seeking wisdom. Stop grasping for enlightenment. Simply be present with what is." Like the man who finally set down his lantern and saw, for the first time, the stars that had been there all along. "I don't understand," Chodak said. "Good," the Master replied. "That not understanding is closer to wisdom than all your previous trying to understand." Chodak returned to his room. He sat on his meditation cushion. But this time, instead of trying to meditate correctly, instead of straining to have some special experience, instead of seeking enlightenment, he simply sat. He noticed the cold air, the sound of wind, the ache in his body, his wandering thoughts. He did not try to stop his thoughts. He did not try to achieve anything. He simply noticed what was already there, what had always been there, beneath all his striving. And in that simple noticing, without trying, something shifted. Not enlightenment exactly, not sudden illumination, just a small opening, like a door cracking open to let in a slice of light. This story speaks to a profound truth about wisdom and understanding. We approach them as if they are achievements, goals to be reached through effort and striving. We think if we just work hard enough, study long enough, practice intensely enough, we will finally get it. But wisdom is not like that. Understanding is not like that. They are not destinations to be reached, but veils to be lifted. And the lifting happens not through doing more, but through being more present with what already is. Think about trying to fall asleep. The harder you try, the more awake you become. The more you focus on sleep as something to achieve, the further away it gets. Sleep comes only when you stop trying, when you simply allow yourself to rest, to be present with drowsiness without grasping for unconsciousness, or learning to remember a forgotten name. You search and search, trying to force your memory to yield up what you seek. The name stays hidden. But later, when you have given up and are thinking about something else entirely, the name suddenly appears, effortlessly, without trying. This is how wisdom works. This is how deep understanding emerges. Not through the forceful grasping of our striving mind, but through the gentle allowing of our present awareness. When we approach meditation, or spiritual practice, or life itself with a clutching neediness, desperate to achieve, anxious to understand, we are holding up a lantern that blinds us to what we seek. Our very trying obscures what is already here. Wisdom is not hiding from us. Understanding is not playing hard to get. They are here, now, available in this present moment. But we cannot see them because we are too busy searching, too busy trying, too busy looking anywhere except here, now. The paradox is absolute. We find wisdom only when we stop seeking it. We understand only when we release our desperate need to understand. We see only when we stop trying to see and simply look at what is. This does not mean we stop practicing. It means we practice differently, not as a way to get somewhere, but as a way to be more fully here. Not as a method to achieve wisdom, but as an expression of the wisdom that is already present. Just this breath, this moment, this awareness of what is. Nothing more needed, nothing to achieve. Just this, right here, right now. Let yourself rest in not knowing. Let yourself be held by mystery. Let yourself release the exhausting grip of trying. Feel yourself settling deeper. Notice how your breathing has slowed, how your body feels heavier, more at peace. We continue our journey with another story. The master's pointed finger. In southern China, during the Tang dynasty, a young monk named Zhuji served a master whose teaching method was unusual. Whenever anyone asked the master a question about the Dharma, about the nature of reality, about the path to awakening, the master would simply hold up one finger. That was his entire teaching. One finger, raised and held, silent and still. When asked what is Buddha, the master raised one finger. When asked what is the meaning of Bodhidharma coming from the West, the master raised one finger. When asked how does one achieve enlightenment, the master raised one finger. This went on for years. Students came and went. Some left frustrated, ascertain the master was a fraud who had no real teachings. Others stayed, mesmerized by something they could not name, sensing depth beneath the simple gesture. Zhuji watched all of this. He had been the master's attendant for several years. He had seen the raised finger thousands of times. He had observed students' reactions. Some laughed. Some wept. Some bowed deeply. Some walked away angry. The same gesture produced every possible response. One day, when the master was away, a visitor came to the monastery. He asked to speak with a teacher. Zhuji, feeling confident after years of watching his master, decided he could handle this. The visitor asked, "What is the essential teaching of this place?" Without hesitation, Zhuji raised one finger, exactly as he had seen his master do so many times. The visitor seemed satisfied. He bowed and left. Zhuji felt pleased with himself. He had given the correct teaching. He had imitated his master perfectly. When the master returned, someone told him what had occurred. The master's face remained expressionless. He said nothing. But the next morning, he called Zhuji to come to him. Zhuji came eagerly, expecting perhaps to be praised for his skillful teaching. The master looked at him for a long moment. Then, with a movement so quick, Zhuji barely registered it, the master pulled out a knife and cut off Zhuji's finger. Zhuji cried out in pain and shock. He turned to run, cradling his bleeding hand. But as he turned, the master called out his name. "Zhuji!" Without thinking, Zhuji turned back, and the master raised his one finger. In that instant, seeing that raised finger while holding his own bleeding hand, feeling pain shoot through his body, his mind completely present to the shock and confusion of the moment. Juji understood, not with his thinking mind, not with his accumulation of observations and ideas, but with his whole being. He understood. He understood that the master's raised finger was not a symbol, not a gesture that stood for something else, not a code to be deciphered. It was simply this. Right here, right now. One finger. This moment. Nothing to grasp. Nothing to understand with the thinking mind. Juji had been imitating the master's form while completely missing the master's meaning. He had copied the gesture while remaining utterly separate from what the gesture expressed. He thought he understood because he could reproduce the external action. But understanding is not imitation. Wisdom is not replication. True seeing is not copying what others see. Years later, when Juji himself had become a teacher, he continued his master's practice of raising one finger. But now the finger arose from direct understanding, not from imitation. Now when he raised that finger, it was not a copy of what he had seen. It was his own authentic expression of reality as he experienced it in that very moment. This teaching cuts to the heart of how we approach wisdom and understanding. We think we can learn by copying. We observe those who seem wise and we imitate their words, their gestures, their actions. We quote spiritual teachers. We use Buddhist terminology. We adopt the forms of practice we have witnessed. But copying the form is not the same as embodying the substance. Repeating wise words is not the same as speaking from wisdom. Imitating the actions of understanding is not the same as actually understanding. Think about how we approach self-help books, spiritual teachings, therapy. We read about someone else's insight and we think, yes, that's true. We memorize the principle. We can repeat it back perfectly. We might even teach it to others. But when a situation arises that calls for that very wisdom, we react from our habitual patterns, not from the understanding we thought we had integrated. We are Juji before the cutting. We have observed the teaching. We can perform the external gesture, but we have not truly understood. We have not been transformed. We have copied the form while remaining separate from the essence. Real understanding comes not from observing from outside, but from experiencing directly. Not from intellectual comprehension, but from embodied realization. Not from collecting more concepts, but from seeing through the concepts to what is actually here. The master's cutting of Juji's finger was not cruel. It was compassionate surgery. It cut through the student's illusion of understanding. It shocked him out of his thinking mind and into direct presence. In that moment of pain and surprise, when all his concepts fell away, he could finally see what had been there all along. We do not need our fingers cut off to wake up to direct seeing. But we do need to stop pretending that imitating wisdom is the same as being wise. We need to recognize when we are merely copying what we have observed versus speaking from what we have directly experienced. When you repeat something you read in a book, and you know you are just repeating, that is honest. When you acknowledge you are trying out a practice you learned, experimenting with it, that is authentic. But when you convince yourself that having read about something means you understand it, that having observed wisdom means you embody it, you are caught in Juji's trap. The question is always, am I speaking from direct experience? Or am I repeating what I have heard? Am I acting from genuine understanding? Or am I copying what I have seen others do? Am I present to this moment? Or am I performing a role I have learned? This is not to say we cannot learn from others. We absolutely can and should, but we must pass their teachings through the fire of our own experience. We must test them against reality. We must move from intellectual understanding to embodied wisdom. Only then does the raised finger become our own finger, our own direct expression of this moment, this reality, this understanding that cannot be captured in words but only pointed to again and again, one finger at a time. Your breathing is slowing now. Your mind is beginning to quiet. Let yourself sink deeper into rest. Let us continue with another teaching. The Scholar and the Ferryman. There was once a renowned scholar who had spent his entire life studying ancient texts. His library contained thousands of scrolls. He had memorized entire sutras. He could debate philosophy with anyone and almost always won. His reputation extended throughout the provinces as a man of tremendous learning. This scholar decided he must cross a great river to attend an important philosophical conference where the wisest minds would gather. He hired a simple ferryman to take him across. The ferryman was an old man, weathered by sun and water. His hands were rough from years of pulling oars. His boat was simple but sturdy. He helped the scholar aboard and began rowing with strong, steady strokes. The scholar, seeing an opportunity to pass the time and perhaps enlighten this simple waterman, began to speak. "Tell me," he said in the tone of one about to bestow knowledge, "have you studied the classics?" The ferryman pulled on his oars. "No, sir, I cannot read." The scholar made a sound of pity. "How unfortunate. You have wasted a quarter of your life then. The classics contain all the wisdom of the ages. Without them, you are like a ship without a rudder." The ferryman nodded but said nothing. The river flowed beneath them. Waterbirds called from the banks. After some time, the scholar spoke again. "Tell me, have you studied mathematics, the principles of calculation and geometry?" "No, sir," the ferryman replied, his oars dipping and pulling in their ancient rhythm. "I know only how to count the coins passengers give me." "Tragic," the scholar said, shaking his head. "You have wasted half your life. Mathematics reveals the very structure of reality. Without it, you cannot truly understand the world." The ferryman continued rowing. The river widened as they approached its center. The water here was deep and dark. "And what of philosophy?" the scholar pressed. "Surely you have contemplated the great questions of existence, the nature of being, the relationship between mind and matter." "I think about getting passengers safely across," the ferryman said. "I think about whether my boat needs repair. I think about feeding my family." The scholar sighed deeply, as if bearing the weight of all human ignorance. "You have wasted 3/4 of your life. To live without philosophical inquiry is barely to live at all." At that moment, dark clouds that had been gathering burst open. Rain began falling in sheets. Wind whipped the water into choppy waves. The boat rocked violently. The scholar gripped the sides, his face pale. The ferryman worked his oars skillfully, angling the boat to ride the waves rather than fight them. But the storm intensified. A particularly large wave struck, and water poured over the side. The boat began to sink. The ferryman looked at the scholar. "Tell me, sir," he said calmly over the roar of the storm, "have you studied swimming?" The scholar's eyes widened with terror. "No, I never learned. I spent my time with books." "Then I am sorry to say," the ferryman replied, already preparing to dive into the churning water, that you have wasted all of your life. The ferryman, who could swim like a fish, dove into the river, but the scholar, for all his learning, for all his knowledge of classics and mathematics and philosophy, drowned. This story reminds us that wisdom is not the same as knowledge. Understanding is not the same as information. There are many types of intelligence, many forms of knowing, and the most important knowledge is often the kind that helps us navigate the actual conditions of our lives. The scholar had accumulated vast learning. He could quote ancient texts. He could explain complex philosophical concepts. But he had confused this accumulated information with wisdom. He had mistaken his ability to discuss life for his ability to live it. The ferryman, illiterate and unschooled, possessed a different kind of knowledge. He knew the river. He knew weather and water. He knew his boat and his own capabilities. This embodied, practical wisdom had kept him alive and fed his family for decades. In our modern world, we often make the scholar's mistake. We value abstract knowledge over embodied skill. We praise intellectual achievement while dismissing practical competence. We believe that understanding theories about life is more important than knowing how to actually live. Consider someone who has read every book on relationships but cannot maintain a friendship. Someone who has studied nutrition extensively but cannot cook a healthy meal. Someone who knows all about meditation in theory but has never actually sat still for 20 minutes. Or think about how we approach difficult emotions. We read about mindfulness. We learn the neuroscience of stress. We understand cognitively that anxiety is just a feeling that will pass. But when anxiety actually arrives, when our heart races and our thoughts spiral, all that intellectual knowledge often proves useless. We cannot swim. The boat is sinking. Our books cannot save us. True wisdom bridges the gap between knowledge and capability, between understanding and action, between theory and practice. It is knowing that shows up not just in what we can say, but in what we can do, in how we actually move through the challenges life presents. The scholar's contempt for the ferryman's knowledge reveals another truth. We often fail to recognize wisdom when it appears in unfamiliar forms. Because the ferryman could not discuss philosophy, the scholar assumed he had nothing of value to teach. Because the ferryman's knowledge was practical rather than theoretical, the scholar dismissed it as inferior. But who possessed real wisdom? The one who could discuss the nature of reality in abstract terms, or the one who could read water and weather? Who knew his own limits and capabilities? Who could navigate actual challenges rather than theoretical ones? Wisdom recognizes that different situations call for different kinds of knowledge. That someone can be ignorant of books yet wise about life. That the ability to survive, to adapt, to work skillfully with what is. These are forms of understanding as valuable as any philosophical insight. This does not mean we abandon intellectual learning. The scholar's knowledge had value in its proper context. But that context was not a sinking boat in a stormy river. In that situation, the ability to swim mattered more than the ability to recite sutras. Real wisdom asks, what does this situation actually require? What knowledge is useful here? Now, with these specific conditions, am I prepared for the challenges I actually face? Or only for the theoretical challenges I have studied? It asks, can I recognize wisdom in unexpected forms? Can I value the ferryman's knowledge even if it is different from my own? Can I learn from those who cannot speak my language of concepts and theories? Most importantly, it asks, have I learned to swim? When the storms of life arrive, When the boat begins to sink, do I have the embodied skills, the practical capabilities, the lived wisdom to navigate what is actually happening? Your body knows how to rest. Your breath knows how to slow. You do not need to think about it. Just allow it. Another teaching arrives to deepen our understanding. The moon in the water. There was once a monkey who lived in a tree by a deep well. This monkey was clever and curious, always investigating, always trying to understand the world around him. One night, the moon rose full and bright. The monkey looked down into the well and saw the moon's reflection there in the water, perfect and luminous, floating on the dark surface. The monkey became alarmed. The moon had fallen into the well. This was a disaster. The moon was needed in the sky. It guided travelers. It marked the passage of time. Without it, the world would be darker and lost. The monkey began to screech, calling to his companions. Other monkeys came running. The first monkey pointed down into the well. "Look," he cried. "The moon has fallen. We must rescue it." The other monkeys peered down. They saw the moon floating there in the water, and they too became distressed. They had to save the moon. But how? One monkey had an idea. "If we form a chain," he said, "we can reach down into the well and pull the moon out." This seemed brilliant. The strongest monkey wrapped his tail around a branch overhanging the well. A second monkey grabbed the first monkey's tail with his hands. A third monkey grabbed the second's tail. And so on, until they had formed a long chain of monkeys, each holding the next, stretching down toward the water where the moon's reflection floated. The bottom monkey reached down, his hand stretching toward the moon. His fingertips touched the water. The reflection rippled and broke apart. He reached further, disturbing the water more. The moon's image scattered into 1,000 fragments of light. "It's breaking apart," the bottom monkey cried. "I can't catch it," he thrashed in the water, trying to gather up the fragments of moonlight. His movements created more ripples. The reflection shattered completely. Then, the branch could no longer hold the weight of all those monkeys. It cracked. With a great crash and many screams, all the monkeys fell into the well together, splashing and scrambling. Wet and sputtering, they climbed out of the well, defeated and confused. They sat on the edge, dripping, mourning their failure to save the moon. One of the youngest monkeys looked up at the sky. He said quietly. "The moon is up there." All the monkeys looked up. There, sailing peacefully through the heavens as it always had, was the moon. Full, bright, untouched by their efforts, completely unconcerned with the drama that had unfolded below. The moon had never fallen. It had never needed rescuing. What they had seen in the well was only a reflection, a trick of light and water. They had suffered and struggled and fallen, all to save something that existed only in their minds. This teaching speaks directly to how we create suffering through mistaking reflections for reality, how we chase illusions, believing them to be real, how we invest tremendous energy in solving problems that exist only because we have not understood the nature of what we are looking at. The monkeys were not stupid. They saw something that appeared to be the moon. They responded with compassion, wanting to help. Their actions were based on what they believed they understood, but their understanding was based on a fundamental misperception. Consider how much of our lives mirrors this story. We see reflections and think they are the thing itself. We confuse the map for the territory. We mistake our thoughts about reality for reality itself. You feel anxious about a conversation that has not yet happened. In your mind, you play out terrible scenarios. You imagine what the other person will say, how you will respond, how badly it will go. You suffer over this imagined conversation as if it were real. You are trying to rescue the moon from the well. You are thrashing in the water, trying to catch a reflection. Or you replay a past conversation over and over, thinking about what you should have said, how you should have acted differently. You feel anger or shame about this remembered event. But what you are experiencing is not the event itself, which is gone, finished, in the past. You are experiencing your thoughts about the event, your mental reflection of something that no longer exists. You are reaching into the well, trying to grasp the moon. The reflection appears real. It looks like the moon, but it is not the moon. Your thoughts about a future conversation are not the conversation. Your memories of past events are not the events themselves. These are reflections, images created by your mind, and you are exhausting yourself trying to save, fix, control, or change them. This happens with our self-image too. We form ideas about who we are, what we are worth, what we are capable of. These ideas are reflections, mental constructs, images that appear in the water of our consciousness. But we take them to be reality. We suffer over our self-image, trying to improve it, protect it, defend it. We are monkeys forming chains, reaching desperately for a reflection. True wisdom sees reflections as reflections. It sees thoughts as thoughts. It sees mental constructs as mental constructs. It does not confuse these with the reality they reflect. This does not mean thoughts and reflections have no value. The moon's reflection can show us where the real moon is. If we look up instead of down, our thoughts about a conversation can help us prepare, but only if we remember they are not the actual conversation. Our memories can inform us, but only if we do not mistake them for present reality. The tragedy of the monkeys is that they never looked up. They saw the reflection and never thought to check if the real moon was still in the sky. They committed completely to their initial understanding without questioning whether it might be incomplete or mistaken. How often do we do this? We form an understanding of a person, a situation, our own capabilities, and then we never check if our understanding matches reality. We commit to beliefs formed years ago and never test them against present circumstances. We see one reflection and assume we know the whole truth. Wisdom suggests, look up. Check. Is what you think is happening actually happening? Is what you believe about yourself still true? Or is it an old reflection of someone you used to be? Is the problem you are trying so hard to solve a real problem, or a reflection in the water of your anxious mind? The moon is where it has always been. Reality is what it is. Our reflections, our thoughts, our concepts about reality. These are useful tools for navigation. But they are not the thing itself. When we forget this distinction, we create suffering. We fall into the well trying to save something that was never in danger. Breathe now. Notice the difference between your breath and your thoughts about your breath. Notice the gap between what is actually here and the stories your mind tells about what is here. This noticing is the beginning of wisdom. Let us continue our gentle journey into understanding. The clay Buddha, in a small monastery in Vietnam, during a time of great turmoil, when temples were being destroyed and monks scattered, there was a large Buddha statue made of clay. It was ancient, unremarkable, coated in years of dirt and weather. It stood in the corner of the temple garden, mostly ignored. When soldiers came to raid the monastery, they took the golden statues, the precious scrolls, anything of obvious value. They glanced at the old clay Buddha and left it alone. It appeared worthless. Years passed. The war ended. Monks slowly returned to rebuild their scattered communities. A young monk was assigned to clean the temple grounds. He came to the old clay Buddha, covered now in vines and bird droppings, cracked from years of weather. He began to clean it, more from duty than from any expectation. As he washed the clay, he noticed something strange. In one of the cracks, he saw something glinting. He looked closer. The glint was gold. The monk carefully chipped away more of the clay. Beneath it, gold. He worked faster, his heart pounding. He called the other monks. Together, they removed the clay coating. Underneath was a Buddha made of solid gold. Perhaps the most valuable Buddha statue in all of Vietnam, worth a fortune beyond measuring. The clay had been added centuries ago, someone realized, to hide the golden Buddha during a previous war. The monks of that era had covered it, protected it, then died without passing on the secret. For generations, no one knew what lay beneath the worthless-looking exterior. The golden Buddha had been there all along. Perfect, valuable, untarnished, waiting under its protective layer of common clay. This story serves as a powerful metaphor for our own nature, and for the nature of wisdom and understanding. The golden Buddha represents our true nature, our Buddha nature, as it is called in Buddhist teachings. The clay represents the layers of conditioning, the accumulated thoughts and beliefs and fears that cover over what we truly are. We spend our lives thinking we are the clay. We identify with the outer coating, the personality we have developed, the roles we play, the story we tell about who we are. We believe ourselves to be limited, flawed, ordinary, unremarkable. We are certain we know what we are made of. But underneath, there is something else entirely. Something precious, valuable, perfect in its own nature. Not perfect in the sense of having no flaws, but perfect in the sense of being complete, whole, exactly as it should be. Wisdom is the process of discovering what lies beneath. Understanding is the recognition that we are not the clay coating, but the gold underneath. This discovery does not require becoming something different. The gold is already there. It has always been there. We just have to recognize it. Consider how this plays out in actual life. You have a thought, "I am not good enough." This thought feels absolutely true. You have evidence. All the times you failed, all the ways you fell short, all the people who were disappointed in you. The thought becomes a belief. The belief becomes part of your identity. This is who you are. Not good enough. But this is clay. It is a coating, a layer added on through experience and interpretation. Underneath is something that cannot be measured as good enough or not good enough. Something that exists prior to all these judgments and evaluations. Your true nature, which is neither good nor bad, neither enough nor not enough, but simply is. Or you think I am anxious. Anxiety is part of who I am. I am an anxious person. And yes, anxiety arises in your experience. The feeling is real. But are you the anxiety? Or are you the awareness in which anxiety appears? Are you the coating of clay? Or the gold underneath that remains untouched even when clay covers it? The spiritual journey, at its essence, is the process of removing clay to reveal gold. Not by adding more, not by becoming better, not by fixing ourselves, but by seeing through what we are not to what we truly are. This is why the Master says to empty your cup. The cup is filled with clay, with concepts about yourself, with beliefs about what you are and what you are capable of. Empty the cup, and the gold can be revealed. This is why the ferryman knows something the scholar does not. The ferryman, through his simple life, has less clay. He is closer to direct experience, to what is actually real, rather than being lost in layers of concepts and theories about reality. This is why the monkeys cannot save the moon. They are so focused on the reflection, on the surface appearance, that they never see what is actually there, unchanged and untouched by their efforts. The recognition of our true nature is not a one-time event. The clay was added in layers over many years. It is removed in layers too, gradually, through practice and insight and the patient work of seeing clearly. Every time you notice a thought is just a thought, not reality itself, you chip away a bit of clay. Every time you recognize that your anxiety is not who you are, but rather something arising in your awareness, you reveal a bit more gold. Every time you see through a belief to the actual experience underneath, the coating becomes thinner. What makes this difficult is that we have lived with the clay so long we think it is what we are. We have identified with it completely. The suggestion that we are gold underneath seems like fantasy, like wishful thinking, like some kind of spiritual fairy tale. But consider, have you ever had a moment when you forgot yourself completely? When you were so absorbed in something that all your self-consciousness dropped away? In those moments, where was your identity? Where were all those thoughts about who you are and what you are worth? They were still there, like clay in storage. But you were not experiencing them. You were experiencing directly, without the filter of self-concept. You were closer to the gold, even if just for a moment. This is what wisdom points to. This is what understanding reveals. Not that you should become golden, but that you already are. Not that you need to achieve Buddha nature, but that you need to recognize the Buddha nature you have always possessed. The clay protected the golden Buddha during the war. Your conditioning, your personality, your ego structure, these have protected you too. They are not wrong or bad. They serve a purpose. But they are not what you are. They are not the deepest truth of your being. Right now, underneath all your thoughts about yourself, underneath all your fears and hopes and stories, there is something golden, something precious, something that has never been damaged by any of your failures or diminished by any of your imperfections. You do not have to believe this. You just have to be willing to look, to investigate, to notice what is here when you are not so completely identified with the clay coating. Feel your breath right now. In this moment of breathing, before thought labels it good or bad, before mind creates a story about it, there is just breath. Direct, immediate, real. This is a tiny glimpse of what lies underneath, what has always been here. Rest here. Let yourself be held by this deeper reality. Another story continues our journey. The arrow, A man was struck by an arrow. The arrow pierced deep into his shoulder. The pain was intense. His friends rushed to help him. "We must get you to a doctor immediately," they cried. But the wounded man held up his hand. "Wait," he said, even as blood ran down his arm. "Before you remove this arrow, I must know who shot it. Was it a tall man or a short man? Was he from a wealthy family or poor? What village did he come from?" His friends looked at him in astonishment. "These questions can wait. You are bleeding. The arrow must be removed now." But the man insisted. No. I must understand the situation completely. What kind of wood is this arrow made from? What type of bird provided the feathers for the fletching? What was the bowman's motivation for shooting me? Did he intend to kill me? Or was he merely careless? These are important questions. "They are meaningless questions," his friends protested. "You will die from your wound while asking them." But still, the man refused to allow them to remove the arrow. "I must know what type of poison, if any, is on the arrowhead. I must understand the trajectory the arrow took through the air. I must comprehend every aspect of this situation before taking any action." Understanding comes through complete knowledge of all the facts. His friends wept and pleaded, but the man remained firm in his position. He would not remove the arrow until he understood everything about how it came to be in his shoulder. And while he asked his questions, while he demanded answers before accepting treatment, while he insisted on complete understanding before taking action, the wound festered. The poison spread. And he died, his questions unanswered, the arrow still embedded in his flesh. This parable, taught by the Buddha himself, strikes at the heart of how we can use our desire for understanding to avoid dealing with reality. How we can make our quest for wisdom into an obstacle rather than a path. The questions the wounded man asked were not inherently wrong. Information about who shot the arrow, what it was made of, whether it was poisoned, these could all be useful to know. But in that moment, with blood flowing and death approaching, they were irrelevant. What mattered was removing the arrow and treating the wound. We do this constantly. We face suffering, and instead of addressing it directly, we get lost in analyzing why we are suffering. We have a problem, and instead of solving it, we endlessly discuss the problem, understand the problem, research the problem, theorize about the problem. You are in a relationship that causes you pain. Instead of addressing the pain or leaving the relationship, you analyze why you keep choosing partners like this. You read books about attachment styles. You explore your childhood wounds. You understand deeply, completely, the psychological patterns at play. But the arrow remains embedded. The wound continues bleeding. You are unhappy in your work. Instead of making changes, you spend years trying to understand exactly why you are unhappy. Is it the specific tasks, the particular boss, the industry as a whole, your own expectations? You analyze and analyze. You seek complete understanding before taking action. And years pass. The arrow remains. Or you feel anxious. Instead of working directly with the anxiety, instead of learning to be present with it, instead of investigating what it feels like in your body right here and now, you research anxiety. You read about its neurological basis. You learn its evolutionary origins. You understand it theoretically, completely, from every angle. But when anxiety arises, you suffer just as much as before. The arrow has not been removed. The Buddha's point with this story is not that understanding is bad. It is that understanding can become a substitute for action, that the quest for complete knowledge can become an excuse to avoid dealing with what is actually here. Sometimes, what we call a desire for wisdom is actually a fear of action. What we frame as seeking understanding is actually avoidance of what is painful or difficult. We hide behind our questions. We use our need to know more, to understand better, to analyze deeper, as a way to postpone the actual work of change. True wisdom knows when to stop asking questions and when to pull out the arrow. It knows when understanding serves us and when it becomes an obstacle. It recognizes the difference between necessary inquiry and endless theorizing. This does not mean we stop thinking or learning. It means we do not let thinking and learning become a replacement for direct engagement with life. It means we do not confuse studying medicine with actually treating wounds. The wounded man's friends knew something he had forgotten in his quest for understanding. There is a time for questions and a time for action. There is a time to seek knowledge and a time to work with what you already know. There is a time to analyze and a time to simply respond to what is actually happening. In spiritual practice, this manifests as the difference between studying Buddhism and practicing Buddhism, between reading about meditation and actually sitting down to meditate, between understanding compassion conceptually and actually being kind to the person in front of you. The arrow of suffering is in you right now. You know this. You feel it. Do you need to understand everything about where it came from before you address it? Do you need complete knowledge of every cause and condition that led to this moment before you can work with what is actually here? Or can you turn your attention directly to the experience itself, to the actual feeling of suffering? Whatever form it takes right now, can you meet it as it is? Work with it as it presents itself, without needing first to understand everything about it. This is a deeper wisdom than the wisdom that comes from knowledge. This is the wisdom that comes from direct engagement with reality, from being present to what is, rather than lost in theories about what is. The questions will always be there. The desire to understand more will always arise. But the arrow is here now. The wound is bleeding now. This moment calls for response, not analysis, for presence, not understanding, for action, not theory. Remove the arrow first. Stop the bleeding. Treat the wound. The questions about where it came from, who shot it, what it was made of, these can come later if they are still relevant. But probably, once the arrow is removed and the wound is healing, those questions will no longer seem quite so urgent. And you will realize that complete understanding was never what you actually needed. Your breath continues. Your body grows heavier. Everything is as it should be. Let us move deeper still. The old woman's teacup. In a mountain village in Japan, there lived an old woman who owned a single teacup. It was plain, unglazed clay, rough to the touch, imperfect in its form. She used it every day for her tea. It fit her hand perfectly. She knew the exact angle at which it poured without dripping. One day, a wealthy tea merchant passed through the village. He saw the old woman drinking from her simple cup. Something about it caught his eye. He looked closer. His hands began to tremble. "Grandmother," he said, his voice shaking, "do you know what this cup is?" She looked at her cup, then at him, puzzled. "It is my teacup." "This," the merchant said, "is a work by the great master Raku. It is perhaps 400 years old. It is priceless. Museums would pay fortunes for it. Collectors would bankrupt themselves to own it. The old woman looked at her cup again. It looked the same as it had that morning, and the morning before, and all the mornings of the many years she had owned it. "How did you come to have it?" the merchant asked. "It was here when I moved into this house," she said. "The previous owner left it. I needed a cup for tea, so I used it." The merchant's mind raced with the value, the significance, the historical importance. "You must sell it," he said. "I will give you enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. You could buy a dozen new cups, beautiful cups, perfect cups." The old woman drank her tea, felt the familiar weight of the cup, the way it sat in her palm. "Why would I sell my cup?" she asked. "It works perfectly well for tea." The merchant could not understand. Did she not grasp what she possessed? Did she not see the value? He tried to explain about raku, about the artistic significance, about the cultural importance, about the rarity. He spoke of museums and collectors and the historical record. The old woman listened politely. Then she said, "I am sure all of that is very interesting, but I need a cup for my morning tea. This one serves that purpose." The merchant left, shaking his head, unable to comprehend such ignorance of value. But the old woman finished her tea, washed her cup as she always did, set it on the shelf to dry, and went about her day. To her, the cup's value lay entirely in its function, in how it served her immediate need. All the history, the artistry, the cultural significance, the monetary worth, these were abstractions. They had nothing to do with drinking tea. This story offers us a teaching about wisdom and the nature of value. From one perspective, the old woman appears ignorant. She possesses something priceless and does not even know it. She could be wealthy, comfortable, free from material worry. She could preserve this precious artifact for future generations. From another perspective, the old woman possesses perfect wisdom. She sees clearly the cup's true value to her, which is its utility, its fit to her hand, its capacity to hold tea. She is not seduced by abstractions. She is not confused by what others tell her something should mean to her. The merchant sees the cup through layers of conceptual understanding. He sees history, artistry, market value, cultural significance. All of these are real in their way, but none of them have anything to do with drinking tea. His knowledge, his understanding, his expertise, these actually prevent him from seeing what the old woman sees, just a cup, serving its purpose. This is often how our knowledge works. It adds layers of meaning, significance, and value that distance us from direct experience. We cannot see a sunset without thinking about how to photograph it. We cannot listen to music without analyzing the chord progression. We cannot meet a person without categorizing them according to various mental frameworks we have learned. Our understanding, which we cultivate so carefully, which we value so highly, often becomes a veil between us and reality. We see through layers of concept, theory, knowledge, belief. We rarely see directly. Think about food. You sit down to eat, but instead of just eating, experiencing the taste, texture, temperature, you think about calories, nutritional value, where it came from, how it was prepared, whether it is organic, whether you should be eating this at all. The direct experience of eating becomes obscured by all these layers of thought about eating. Or you look at your child. But instead of just seeing them, this unique person, right here and now, you see your expectations, your worries, your hopes, your fears. You see the story you tell yourself about what kind of parent you are. You see your mental comparison between your child and other children. The direct experience of your actual child becomes covered over with all these layers of thought about your child. The old woman's wisdom is the wisdom of directness, of seeing what is actually here rather than what we think should be here, of valuing function over significance, of staying close to immediate experience rather than getting lost in abstraction. This is not anti-intellectual. The merchant's knowledge about raku pottery is real and valuable in its proper context. In a museum or a collector's market, that knowledge matters. But for drinking morning tea, it is irrelevant. It is noise. True wisdom knows which context we are actually in. It knows when historical knowledge matters and when direct experience matters. It does not confuse the two. It does not let expertise in one domain claim authority in another. You do not need to know about the neuroscience of breathing to breathe. You do not need to understand Buddhist philosophy to be present to this moment. You do not need conceptual knowledge about awareness to be aware. In fact, sometimes the knowledge gets in the way. You try to meditate, but your mind is full of ideas about meditation. You try to be present, but you are busy evaluating whether you are being present correctly. You try to just experience life, but you are constantly filtering experience through your accumulated understanding of what life means. The question wisdom asks is, can you set aside what you know and meet what is actually here? Can you use understanding as a tool when needed, but not let it become a filter you can never remove? Can you drink tea from a priceless cup without needing to know it is priceless? This is paradoxical because we need knowledge. We need understanding. They serve important purposes. But we also need the capacity to set them aside, to return to direct experience, to see clearly what is actually here rather than what our knowledge tells us should be here. The old woman does not deny the cup's historical significance. She simply recognizes it is not relevant to her purpose. Similarly, we do not need to deny our knowledge or pretend ignorance. We just need to recognize when our accumulated understanding is serving us and when it is creating distance from direct experience. Right now, you are breathing. You can know about breathing, the mechanics, the biology, the meditation techniques, or you can just breathe. Both are valid, but they are different. One is knowledge about, the other is direct experience of. Wisdom knows the difference. Understanding knows when to step back and let direct experience through. The old woman drinks her tea. The cup serves its purpose. This is enough. This is everything. Feel yourself settling now. Notice how thinking is quieting, how presence is becoming easier. Let another story arrive. The two monks and the river. Two monks, Tanzan and Ekido, were traveling together through the countryside. They came to a river where a young woman in an expensive silk kimono stood at the bank, unable to cross. The water was high from recent rains, flowing fast and muddy. Her fine clothes would be ruined. She looked distressed. Tanzan approached her without hesitation. "I can help you across," he said. Without waiting for her reply, he lifted her in his arms and carried her through the water to the opposite bank. He set her down gently. She thanked him and went on her way. Tanzan and Ekido continued their journey. Ekido was silent. His face had tightened. His movements had become stiff. The two monks walked for hours without speaking. Finally, as the sun was setting and they approached the monastery where they would spend the night, Aikido could contain himself no longer. He turned to Tanzan, his voice sharp with accusation. "How could you do that? We monks have taken vows. We are not permitted to touch women. You know this. It is a fundamental rule. Yet you not only touched that woman, you held her in your arms, you carried her across the river. This is a serious violation. This could get you expelled from the order." Tanzan looked at his companion with mild surprise. "Oh, are you still carrying that woman?" he said. "I set her down hours ago." This brief exchange contains profound teaching about wisdom and the nature of attachment. Tanzan acted spontaneously to meet the immediate need before him. A person needed help. He had the capability to help. He helped. Then he moved on. The action was complete. It existed only in that moment, served its purpose, and was finished. Aikido, however, carried the event with him. He did not help the woman, but he carried her far longer than Tanzan did. He held her not in his arms, but in his mind, in his judgment, in his rigid interpretation of rules. Hours after the event was finished, he was still caught in it, still bound by it, still suffering over it. This is how most of us relate to our experiences. We carry them. Long after they are finished, long after they have served whatever purpose they might have had, we hold on to them. We replay them. We judge them. We create stories about what they mean. We bind ourselves to the past, even as we move through the present. Consider an argument you had last week. The argument itself lasted maybe 20 minutes. But how many hours have you spent thinking about it since then, replaying what was said, imagining what you should have said, feeling anger or hurt or righteousness? The argument is over, but you are still carrying it. You are Aikido, walking for hours while mentally holding something that has already been set down. Or think about a mistake you made years ago. The event itself is long past. It is finished, done, unchangeable. But you still carry the shame, the regret, the self-judgment. You are still arguing with reality about what should have been different. You are still suffering over something that no longer exists except as a memory you refuse to set down. Tanzan's wisdom is the wisdom of completion. He did what needed doing in that moment. Then he let it go. He did not carry it forward as a story, as a problem, as a source of pride or shame. He was fully present to helping the woman. Then he was fully present to walking with his companion. Each moment received his complete attention without being contaminated by judgment about the previous moment. Aikido's suffering comes from his attachment to rules and concepts. He has a mental framework about how monks should behave. When reality does not match this framework, when life presents a situation that does not fit neatly into his categories, he cannot let it go. He must judge it, fix it, make sense of it according to his understanding. But reality does not always fit our frameworks. Life does not always align with our rules. Wisdom knows when to follow guidelines and when to respond to the immediate situation. Wisdom can hold principles while also recognizing that principles are meant to serve life, not constrain it. The monk's vow about not touching women was meant to help monks maintain clear boundaries, to protect both monks and women from inappropriate relationships. It had a purpose, but in the situation at the river, following the letter of the vow would mean abandoning compassion. It would mean letting a person suffer when help was easily given. Tanzan saw the essence underneath the rule: compassion, helping those in need, responding to the situation before him. Aikido saw only the rule itself, rigid and absolute, more important than the actual person who needed help. This is how we often relate to our understanding. We learn principles, develop frameworks, accumulate rules about how things should be. Then we cling to these frameworks more tightly than we attend to actual reality. We judge reality according to our concepts, rather than letting reality teach us when our concepts need to be held lightly. True wisdom is flexible. It knows principles, but is not imprisoned by them. It has understanding, but is not rigid in applying it. It can act spontaneously, appropriately, in response to what is actually needed, then let go and move on. The ability to let go, to set down what we are carrying. This might be the essence of wisdom, not the accumulation of knowledge or the perfection of understanding, but the capacity to meet each moment fresh, unburdened by what we are holding from previous moments. Right now, what are you carrying? What past event? What old hurt? What judgment or story? What should have been or should not have been are you still holding? Can you see that you are carrying it? Can you see that it is not actually here in this present moment, except as something you are choosing to hold? Tanzan set the woman down. Can you set down what you are carrying? Not by pushing it away, not by pretending it never happened, but simply by recognizing that the event is finished and you are choosing to keep replaying it. You are choosing to keep carrying what could be set down. This moment is complete. This breath is complete. What happened before is finished. What might happen later has not yet arrived. Right here, right now, there is nothing you need to carry except this immediate experience of being alive, breathing, present. Set it down. Let yourself rest. Be like Tanzan, crossing rivers, helping when help is needed, then moving on, light and free. Your breathing is slow and steady now. Your body is heavy with approaching sleep. Everything can be set down. Everything can rest. We continue deeper into the night, deeper into understanding. The potter's imperfect bowl. In a small village in Korea, there lived a master potter named Kim. He had studied his craft for 40 years. His hands knew clay like old friends. He could throw a bowl with his eyes closed, feeling the shape emerge through his fingertips as the wheel spun. Kim's work was respected throughout the region. Collectors sought his pieces. Other potters studied his technique. His bowls were known for their perfect symmetry, their flawless glazing, their exquisite balance. But Kim himself had grown tired. Tired of perfection. Tired of the expectation that every piece must be flawless. Tired of the rigid standards that defined what made pottery valuable. One day, he sat at his wheel early in the morning. Mist hung in the valley. The workshop smelled of wet earth and wood smoke from the kiln. He centered a lump of clay and began to throw a bowl. His hands moved as they had moved 10,000 times before. The bowl rose smooth and even. But then, deliberately, Kim pressed his thumb into one side. The perfect circle became slightly oblong. He twisted the rim, making it uneven. He scored rough marks into the smooth surface. His apprentices, watching from the corner, exchanged worried glances. Had their master lost his skill? Was he ill? Why was he ruining a perfectly good bowl? Kim continued. He glazed the bowl carelessly, letting the glaze run thick in some places, thin in others. When it emerged from the kiln, it was undeniably imperfect, asymmetrical, rough, marked by what appeared to be mistakes. Kim held the bowl, turning it slowly in the morning light. A smile crossed his face, the first genuine smile his apprentices had seen in months. "This," he said quietly, "is my best work." The apprentices were confused. How could this flawed piece be better than all the perfect bowls he had made? A tea master who was visiting heard about the strange bowl. He came to see it. He held it, examined it from every angle. Then he bowed deeply to Kim. Finally, the tea master said, "You have created something alive. All your perfect bowls were beautiful, but they were dead. This bowl breathes." The tea master explained to the bewildered apprentices, "Perfection is cold. It leaves no room for the soul. It shows technique but hides the human heart. This bowl, with its imperfections, its irregularities, its rough marks, shows the hand of the maker. It is not trying to be anything other than what it is. It does not pretend. It is honest." He continued, "When I drink tea from a perfect bowl, I think about the potter's skill. When I drink from this bowl, I forget about the potter entirely. I simply drink tea. The bowl serves its purpose and does not demand attention for itself. This is the highest art." Kim nodded. "For 40 years, he said, I chased perfection. I thought wisdom meant mastery, flawlessness, the elimination of all mistakes. But perfection is just another form of control. It is the ego trying to prove itself through objects." He held up the imperfect bowl. "This bowl taught me that true wisdom accepts what is. It does not fight against the natural irregularities of life. It does not demand that everything conform to some ideal standard. It allows reality to be what it is, marks and all." One apprentice dared to ask, "But Master, should we not strive to improve? Should we not work toward excellence?" "Yes," Kim said, "but excellence is not the same as perfection. Excellence means doing your best with full presence and care. Perfection means trying to eliminate all traces of being human. Excellence accepts that mistakes happen, that irregularities emerge, that life is messy. Perfection wars against these truths." From that day forward, Kim's pottery changed. He still possessed all his skill, all his technique, but he no longer used that skill to create flawlessness. He used it to create honesty. His pieces became more valued, more sought after, precisely because they stopped trying to be perfect. This story speaks to our modern obsession with perfection. We live in a world of filters and editing, where everyone presents a carefully curated version of themselves. We see images of perfect bodies, perfect homes, perfect lives. We compare our messy reality to these polished illusions and feel we are failing. We apply this same standard to our spiritual lives. We think wisdom means having everything figured out. Understanding means having no doubts. Growth means becoming flawless. We imagine enlightened beings as perfect, beyond mistakes, completely controlled and polished. But this is not how wisdom actually works. Real wisdom has rough edges. True understanding accepts uncertainty. Genuine growth includes setbacks and mistakes and the willingness to be imperfect. Consider how you relate to your own flaws. Perhaps you are anxious sometimes. Perhaps you get angry. Perhaps you make the same mistakes repeatedly, despite knowing better. Instead of accepting these as part of being human, you war against them. You try to perfect yourself, to eliminate all traces of messiness, to become someone who never struggles. This warring is exhausting. It is also futile. You are not meant to be perfect. You are meant to be fully human, which includes imperfection, messiness, irregularity. Like Kim's bowl, your value does not come from flawlessness, but from honesty, from being authentically what you are. Think about the people you most respect, most love, most learn from. Are they perfect? Do they never make mistakes? Do they have all the answers? Probably not. What you value in them is their humanity, their willingness to be real, their acceptance of their own limitations. The same is true for you. Others do not need you to be perfect. They need you to be present, honest, real. Your imperfections, your struggles, your rough edges, these are not flaws to be eliminated. They are part of what makes you human, what makes you relatable, what makes you capable of genuine connection. This does not mean we stop trying to grow or improve. Kim still used all his skill and decades of practice, but he stopped using that skill to war against reality. He used it to work with reality, to express truth rather than impose perfection. Similarly, we can work to grow, to learn, to develop greater capacity for wisdom and compassion. But we do this from acceptance of what we are, not from rejection of our humanness. We do this as an expression of care, not as an attempt to prove our worth by becoming flawless. The perfect bowl is impressive but cold. The imperfect bowl serves tea and reveals the hand that made it. Which would you rather be? Which would you rather offer the world? Your imperfections are not obstacles to wisdom. They are part of the landscape in which wisdom emerges. Your mistakes are not evidence of failure. They are the raw material of learning. Your rough edges are not shameful flaws. They are the marks of having actually lived, having tried, having been present to life in all its messy reality. Wisdom is not smooth perfection. Wisdom is the acceptance of what is, the willingness to work with reality rather than against it, the recognition that life is irregular and that is exactly as it should be. Breathe now into your imperfect body. Rest in your imperfect moment. Let yourself be held by life exactly as you are, not as you think you should be. This is enough. You are enough, just as you are. Let us continue our journey with another teaching. The Zen master's garden. In a monastery deep in the mountains, there was a Zen master famous for the beauty of his garden. Visiting monks would walk its paths and marvel. Every stone seemed perfectly placed. Every plant appeared exactly where it should be. The garden felt like a manifestation of harmony itself. A young monk asked the master one day, "How do you create such perfection? What is your secret to making this garden so beautiful?" The master smiled. "I do not create perfection," he said. "I remove obstacles. I clear away what prevents the garden's natural beauty from showing itself." The young monk did not understand. He watched the master work over the following weeks. He saw him pull weeds. He saw him trim branches that blocked light. He saw him remove stones that disrupted the flow of the path. But he also saw the master leave many things that seemed out of place. There was a rock, large and ungainly, that sat at an odd angle near the pond. The young monk thought it should be moved or removed, but the master left it. There was a tree that grew crooked, its trunk bent from some long ago storm. The young monk thought it should be straightened or cut down, but the master left it. There were patches where moss grew wild and uneven, where the careful pattern of the stone path was interrupted. The young monk thought these should be cleaned and ordered, but the master left them. One autumn day, as leaves fell and scattered across the garden, the young monk could contain his confusion no longer. "Master," he said, "I do not understand. You say you create harmony by removing obstacles, but you leave so much that seems out of place. That rock is in the wrong position. That tree is crooked. The moss grows wild. Why do you not fix these things?" The master led the young monk to sit near the pond. They sat in silence for a long time. Leaves floated on the water. A bird called from the crooked tree. Light played across the surface of the awkwardly placed stone. "Tell me," the master said finally, "what makes you think the rock is in the wrong place? It looks uncomfortable there." The young monk replied, "It does not fit with the rest of the garden's harmony." "Does the rock know it is in the wrong place?" the master asked. "Does it suffer from being positioned awkwardly, or is it simply being a rock, exactly where it is, perfectly content?" The young monk had no answer. "And the tree," the master continued, "you say it is crooked. Crooked compared to what? To your idea of how a tree should look, but the tree does not have your ideas. It grew responding to wind and light and the particular conditions of this hillside. It is not crooked. It is exactly the shape it needed to be to survive and thrive here." The master gestured to the moss. "You want to control the moss, to make it grow in a pattern that pleases your sense of order. But moss grows where conditions support it. It spreads according to moisture and shade. It is already in perfect harmony with reality. Your desire to impose a different pattern is what creates disharmony." The young monk began to see. What he had thought were flaws in the garden were actually his own ideas about how things should be. The garden itself was already in harmony. His mind's desire for a different kind of order was what created the perception of imperfection. "My work," the master said, "is not to make the garden beautiful according to my ideas. It is to remove the obstacles that prevent its inherent beauty from being seen. I pull weeds because they choke other plants. I trim branches that block light. I clear the path so people can walk without stumbling. But I do not impose my vision of perfection onto what is already perfect in its own way." He continued, "The obstacle I remove most frequently is not in the garden. It is in the mind of the observer. When you come to the garden expecting it to conform to your ideas of beauty, you cannot see its actual beauty. You see only where it fails to match your expectations." The young monk sat with this teaching. Gradually, he began to see the garden differently. The rock's awkward angle created an interesting shadow pattern on the pond. The crooked tree provided perfect perches for the birds that sang each morning. The wild moss added texture and life that a perfectly ordered pattern could never provide. The garden had not changed. His seeing had changed. And in this new way of seeing, the garden was even more beautiful than he had first thought, because its beauty was not imposed from outside, but emerged from what it actually was. This teaching goes to the heart of wisdom and understanding. We so often think wisdom means knowing how things should be and working to make them that way. We think understanding means having the right concepts and judging reality according to those concepts. But real wisdom sees things as they are. Real understanding recognizes that our ideas about how things should be are often the main obstacle to seeing clearly what actually is. In our lives, We do this constantly. We have an idea of how a good relationship should look, and then we judge our actual relationships against this ideal. We have a concept of what a successful career should be, and we measure our actual work against this standard. We have beliefs about how we should feel, what we should want, who we should be, and we constantly find ourselves failing to match these internalized ideals. But what if the problem is not us? What if the problem is the ideal itself? What if, like the rock in the garden, we are exactly where we need to be, shaped by the particular conditions of our lives, and the only thing wrong is our belief that we should be different? Consider a difficult emotion you have been fighting. Perhaps shame. You think you should not feel shame. Shame is bad, wrong, something to be eliminated. So you war against it. You try to make yourself not feel it. You judge yourself for feeling it. The shame itself might cause some discomfort, but your war against it causes much more suffering. What if the shame is like the crooked tree? What if it grew for reasons, in response to conditions, and fighting against it only creates more pain? What if acceptance, seeing it clearly without the overlay of your judgments about how you should feel, what if that is the path to peace? Or think about someone in your life who frustrates you. You have ideas about how they should be. More considerate, more responsible, more like you imagine they could be if they just tried harder. Your ideas about how they should be different create constant friction between you. What if they are like the wild moss, growing according to their own conditions, not wrong or flawed, but simply being what they are? What if your ideas about who they should be are the obstacle, not their actual behavior? The master's wisdom was recognizing when to intervene and when to accept. Weeds that harm other plants should be removed. Branches that block necessary light should be trimmed. But rocks that sit at odd angles, trees that grow crooked, moss that spreads wild, these are not problems to fix. They are reality being reality, and trying to force reality to match our preferences only creates suffering. This is the most difficult wisdom to embody, accepting what is. Not passive resignation, not giving up on all effort to create positive change, but discerning between fighting against reality and working with it, between imposing our ideas and responding to what is actually here. Your life right now, exactly as it is, may not match your ideas of how it should be. But perhaps, like the awkward rock, it is exactly where it needs to be. Perhaps, like the crooked tree, it has grown this particular shape in response to the particular conditions you have faced. Perhaps, like the wild moss, there is a natural rightness to it that becomes visible only when you stop trying to force it into a different pattern. Let yourself rest now. Let yourself be exactly as you are. Let your breath be exactly as it is. Let this moment be just this moment. No need for it to be different, better, more peaceful, more anything. Just this, as it is, already complete, already whole, already harmonious beneath whatever ideas you have been holding about how it should be different. Another story continues our journey deeper into rest. The mountain and the valley. Long ago in Tibet, there was a valley where a small community lived in peace. The valley was fertile, protected from harsh winds by surrounding mountains. The people grew barley and raised yaks. Life was simple, predictable, sufficient. One day, a young man named Dorje announced he would climb the highest mountain that towered above their valley. The elders shook their heads. Why? They asked. The valley provides everything we need. The mountain is dangerous, cold, inhospitable. What purpose does climbing it serve? But Dorje felt called. He could not explain why, even to himself. He simply knew he had to climb. He prepared for months. He gathered supplies, studied the mountain's face, talked to the few traders who had crossed the high passes. Finally, one spring morning, he set out. The climb was everything the elders had warned. Brutal, exhausting, dangerous. His muscles screamed. His lungs burned in the thin air. Several times he nearly turned back. But something kept pulling him upward. After many days, he reached the summit. He stood at the peak, wind howling around him, prayer flags snapping from a cairn built by some previous climber. And he saw, from the summit, he could see not just his valley but many valleys. He could see how the mountains connected, forming a vast range that extended beyond his imagination. He could see distant lands, different climates, other ways of living. The world he had known his entire life, the valley that contained everything he thought existed, was just one small fold in an enormous landscape. The view transformed him, not because the valley was wrong or small or insufficient, but because seeing it in context, seeing how it fit into something much larger, changed his understanding of everything. He descended. The journey down was faster, but no less challenging. When he finally returned to the valley, exhausted and transformed, the elders asked, "What did you learn up there?" Dorje struggled to find words. "The valley is perfect," he said finally. "Everything you have told me about it is true. It provides for us. It protects us. It is good. But..." He paused, searching. "It is also just one valley. There are other valleys, other mountains, other ways of being. What we know here is not all there is to know." An old grandmother leaned forward. "Did the mountain make the valley wrong?" "No," Dorje said quickly. "The valley is still good. But now I see it differently. I see it as one possibility among many. I appreciate it more deeply because I see it could have been different. And I appreciate what lies beyond it, which I could never have known if I had stayed here." Another elder asked, "Then was the climb worth the danger and effort?" Dorje thought for a long time. "The valley wisdom is wisdom," he said. "Knowing how to live well here, how to work with these conditions, how to find sufficiency in what we have. This is real and valuable. But mountain wisdom is also wisdom. Seeing the larger context, understanding how things connect, recognizing that our truth is not the only truth." He continued, "I needed both. The valley taught me depth. The mountain taught me breadth. The valley taught me to look closely at what is here. The mountain taught me to see how what is here fits into larger patterns. Both are necessary. Both are true." The elders nodded slowly. They understood, in their way, what he had learned. That staying in the valley and climbing the mountain were both valid paths. That neither was wrong. That wisdom could be found in both depth and breadth, in both staying and going, in both knowing one thing completely and understanding how many things connect. This story speaks to different dimensions of wisdom and understanding. Valley wisdom is the wisdom of depth, of knowing one thing completely, of understanding the particular. Mountain wisdom is the wisdom of breadth, of seeing contexts and connections, of understanding the universal. We need both. Yet we often believe we must choose one or the other. We commit to depth and call those who seek breadth superficial. Or we pursue breadth and call those who stay with depth narrow. We make one kind of knowing right and the other wrong. But they are complementary, not contradictory. The valley becomes richer when understood in relation to other valleys. The mountain view becomes meaningful only because we have known valleys intimately. Think about your own life. Perhaps you have gone deep in one area. You have become expert in your field, deeply knowledgeable about your particular domain. This is valley wisdom. You know this terrain completely. You see nuances others miss. You can work with great skill within this specific context. This is valuable, essential, but it can also become limiting if it is all you know. If you never climb to see how your valley relates to other valleys, how your domain connects to other domains, you may mistake your particular knowledge for universal truth. Or perhaps you have gone wide. You have read broadly, experienced many different fields, traveled, explored various perspectives. This is mountain wisdom. You see connections. You recognize patterns that emerge across different domains. You understand context and relativity. This too is valuable, essential. But it can become shallow if it never goes deep. If you never descend into a valley and really live there, working intimately with particular conditions, your breadth of understanding may lack the depth that only comes from sustained engagement with one specific reality. The wisest path involves both movements, going deep into particular knowledge and experience, then stepping back to see it in larger context, then returning to depth with enriched understanding, then expanding again to include more. A rhythm of valley and mountain, depth and breadth, particular and universal. In spiritual practice, this means both deepening into one tradition and remaining open to insights from other paths. Both going deep in meditation and understanding how contemplative practice connects to the rest of life. Both knowing yourself intimately and recognizing how much of what you think is uniquely you is actually shaped by larger forces and patterns. The valley people were not wrong. Their way of life was good and sustainable. But if Dorje had never climbed, if no one had ever ventured beyond the valley, their collective wisdom would have been incomplete. They would have mistaken their particular truth for the only truth. Similarly, the mountain view is not enough on its own. Without the grounding of valley wisdom, without deep knowledge of how to actually live well in particular conditions, the broad perspective becomes abstract, disconnected from the reality of actual living. You need depth to keep breadth meaningful. You need breadth to keep depth from becoming narrow. You need to know your valley completely, and you need to climb high enough to see how it fits into the larger landscape. This is the integration that constitutes mature wisdom, not choosing between depth and breadth, but learning to move between them, not defending one form of knowledge against another, but recognizing each has its place and purpose. Right now, in this moment, you are in a valley of experience. This particular body, this particular breath, this particular set of conditions. Know this valley. Feel it completely. Be present to its specific, particular reality. And also know that this valley is one valley. This moment is one moment. This experience is one experience. It is not all that is. It does not encompass everything that can be known or felt or understood. Both truths at once. The valley and the mountain. The depth and the breadth. The particular and the universal. This is wisdom that sees clearly. Let your breathing continue, soft and easy. Let yourself sink deeper into rest, into the valley of sleep, while knowing the mountains remain, patient and eternal, waiting for another day. We journey onward. The water-bearer's cracked pot. In India, during a time when water had to be carried daily from the river to the village, there lived a water-bearer. Each day, he walked the long path from the river back to the village, balancing a pole across his shoulders. From each end of the pole hung a pot filled with water. One pot was perfect. It was beautifully crafted, glazed, smooth, without a single crack. It held water perfectly. Not a drop was lost during the journey. The water-bearer could fill it at the river and deliver exactly the same amount to the village. The other pot was cracked. A long fissure ran down one side. All along the path, water leaked out through this crack. By the time the water-bearer reached the village, this pot was only half full. For 2 years, the water-bearer made this journey twice daily. The perfect pot was proud of its accomplishment. Every drop entrusted to it was delivered. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do, fulfilling its purpose perfectly. The cracked pot was ashamed. Every day it started full, and every day it ended half empty. It saw itself as a failure, broken, unable to fulfill its basic function. It felt inferior to the perfect pot, embarrassed by its obvious flaw. One day, the cracked pot could bear its shame no longer. As the water-bearer filled it at the river, the pot spoke. "I must apologize to you," it said. The water-bearer, accustomed to the pot's voice after so many years together, smiled. "Apologize? For what? For my crack?" The pot said miserably. "Every day you do twice the work to carry me, and still I deliver only half the water I should. I am defective, broken. I waste your efforts." The water-bearer set down his pole. "Have you noticed?" he said to the cracked pot. "The path we walk each day?" "Of course," the pot replied. "The long, dusty path from the river to the village. Look more carefully tomorrow," the water-bearer said. "Pay attention to what you see." The next morning, as they made the journey, the cracked pot really looked, and it saw something it had never noticed before. On the perfect pot side of the path, the ground was bare, dusty, dry. Nothing grew there. But on the cracked pot side of the path, there were flowers, beautiful wildflowers in every color. Grasses grew green and thick. Butterflies danced among the blossoms. Birds sang in the shrubs that had taken root. "Do you see?" the water-bearer asked. "I have always known about your crack, and I have used it. I planted seeds along your side of the path. Every day, as you leak water, you water these seeds. Because of your crack, I have flowers to bring to the temple. Because of what you call your flaw, beauty grows along the path I walk twice daily." The cracked pot was silent, understanding dawning. Its crack had seemed like pure liability, waste, failure, but the water-bearer had seen possibility, had used what the pot thought was its greatest weakness to create something the perfect pot, for all its excellence, could never produce. "The perfect pot serves its purpose perfectly," the water-bearer said. "And you serve a different purpose, just as perfectly. I need you both. The village needs water from the perfect pot. The temple needs flowers from your crack. Both are necessary. Both are valuable. Your flaw is not a failure. It is a feature. This teaching strikes at the heart of how we understand ourselves and our limitations. We identify our cracks, our flaws, our failures to meet some standard of perfection, and we are ashamed. We think these make us less valuable, less worthy, less capable of contributing. But wisdom sees differently. Wisdom recognizes that our cracks, our imperfections, our unique quirks and limitations, these are not just obstacles to work around. They are opportunities for unexpected beauty. They create possibilities that perfection cannot. Think about your own life. What do you consider your greatest flaw? Perhaps you are too sensitive. Perhaps you are not as smart as you wish you were. Perhaps you struggle with anxiety, or you are not as disciplined as you think you should be, or you have physical limitations, or you keep making the same mistakes. These feel like pure liability, like cracks in your pot that mean you cannot do what you are supposed to do, cannot be who you are supposed to be, cannot measure up to some standard. But look more carefully. Look at what grows along your path because of these very limitations. The sensitivity that seems like weakness might make you deeply attuned to others' pain, able to offer comfort that less sensitive people cannot. The anxiety that feels like failure might make you careful, thoughtful, attentive to details others miss. Your struggles with discipline might have taught you compassion for others who struggle. Your mistakes might have given you wisdom that people who never fail never acquire. Your limitations might have forced you to develop strengths in areas you would never have explored if you were naturally talented everywhere. The cracked pot thought its value would come from being like the perfect pot, from fulfilling the same function without flaw. But its true value came from being exactly what it was, crack and all, and being used by someone wise enough to see potential in imperfection. This is what life does, if we let it. It uses our cracks, not despite them but through them. The water that leaks out creates unexpected gardens. The ways we fail to be perfect open paths to contribute in ways perfection never could. This does not mean we should not work to grow, to improve, to develop greater capacity. The water bearer did not deliberately crack the second pot. Wholeness has its value. But when we find ourselves cracked, as we all are in various ways, wisdom sees how these very cracks might water seeds that otherwise would never bloom. The shame the cracked pot felt came from comparing itself to the perfect pot, from believing there was only one right way to be, one standard of value. This comparison created suffering where there needed to be none. How much of your own suffering comes from similar comparison, from measuring yourself against those who appear perfect in ways you are not? From believing your value depends on being something other than what you actually are? The water bearer needed both pots. The village needed water. The temple needed flowers. There was no hierarchy. Both were necessary. Both were valued. The cracked pot's shame came from not understanding its own worth, not from actual worthlessness. You are cracked. So is everyone, in various ways. These cracks are not what make you worthless. They are what make you unique. They are what create unexpected beauty along the path you walk. They are what allow you to contribute in ways that those who appear perfect in the ways you are not cannot. Your imperfections are not obstacles to offering yourself to the world. They are part of how you offer yourself to the world. They are part of your gift, not separate from it. The question is not, how can I fix my cracks? but rather what grows along my path because of them. What unexpected beauty emerges through what I thought was pure flaw. This shift in seeing, this is wisdom. This recognition of value in imperfection, this is understanding. Not understanding in the sense of figuring everything out, but understanding in the sense of seeing clearly what is actually here rather than what you think should be here. Rest now in your cracked perfection. Let yourself be exactly what you are. Notice how much beauty has grown along your path precisely because you were not the perfect pot. This is enough. You are enough. Let sleep come, gentle and complete. Another teaching awaits. The student who became lost. There was once a student who studied with a famous teacher. For 3 years, the student learned everything the teacher had to offer. He memorized teachings. He practiced diligently. He could explain complex philosophical points with great clarity. One day, feeling he had learned all the teacher could teach, the student decided to set off on his own. He would travel, teach others what he had learned, perhaps even find students of his own. The teacher walked with him to the edge of the village. Remember, the teacher said before they parted, the map is not the territory. The student nodded, thinking he understood. The teacher had taught him about the difference between concepts and reality many times. The student traveled for weeks through unfamiliar country. One evening, he found himself in a dense forest as darkness was falling. He realized he had lost the path. He was completely disoriented, unsure which direction led out of the forest. He sat down, trying not to panic. Then he remembered his training. He pulled out paper and began to draw a map based on what he could remember of his journey. He noted landmarks. He calculated distances. He used everything his teacher had taught him about navigation and orientation. He studied his map carefully. According to his calculations, if he walked east for 2 hours, he should reach the river he had crossed earlier. From there, he could follow the water back to familiar territory. Confident in his map, in his understanding, in his training, he set off, walking east. He walked for 2 hours. No river. He walked another hour. Still no river. By now it was fully dark. He was exhausted and even more lost than before. He sat down against a tree, defeated. All his training, all his knowledge, all his careful mapping had led him nowhere. He had done everything correctly according to what he had learned, yet he was still hopelessly lost. He sat in the darkness, giving up on trying to figure it out. He simply sat, cold, tired, lost, no longer trying to solve the problem, just experiencing being lost. As he sat, his breath slowed, his racing thoughts quieted, and he noticed something, the faintest sound of running water, not from the direction he had been walking, but from behind him. He stood and walked toward the sound. Within 10 minutes, he found a small stream. He followed it, and within another hour, that stream joined a larger one, and that one eventually joined the river he had been seeking. By midnight, he was back on familiar paths, exhausted but safe. When he eventually made his way back to his teacher months later, he told this story. "I thought I understood when you said the map is not the territory," he confessed. "But I had to get lost to truly learn it. My map was perfect according to what I knew. My reasoning was flawless. My calculations were correct. But they were all based on a memory of where I had been. not on what was actually there in that moment. The teacher nodded. "And what found the river?" Not thinking, the student said. "Not my knowledge or my training. When I gave up trying to figure it out, when I just sat with being lost, I could hear what was actually there. The water had been there all along. But my map, my thinking about where the water should be, prevented me from hearing where it actually was." This teaching goes to the heart of a profound limitation in our understanding. We create mental models of reality. We gather knowledge, form concepts, develop frameworks for understanding. These maps are useful. They help us navigate. They allow us to plan and predict. But the map is never the territory. And when we confuse our understanding of reality with reality itself, when we trust our map more than we trust our direct experience, we become lost. The student's mistake was not in creating a map. The mistake was in believing the map more than he believed his own direct perception. When his map said the river was east and his ears heard water behind him, he chose the map. He chose his understanding over his actual experience. We do this constantly. We have ideas about who we are, what we are capable of, what we need to be happy. These ideas become maps. When reality does not match the map, when direct experience contradicts our understanding, we often choose the map. We dismiss the experience as wrong, unusual, not trustworthy. Your map says you need a particular kind of job to be fulfilled. But you take a different job and find unexpected satisfaction. Instead of updating your map, you doubt your experience. You think you must be settling or fooling yourself because your experience does not match your understanding of what should fulfill you. Or your map says anxiety is bad and should be eliminated. When anxiety arises and you notice it can coexist with functionality, that you can be anxious and still do what needs doing, you doubt this experience. You think you must be suppressing or denying because your map says anxiety and capability are incompatible. The student's salvation came when he stopped consulting his map and started consulting reality. When he sat in not knowing, when he listened to what was actually there rather than to his thoughts about what should be there. This is the wisdom of direct experience over conceptual understanding. Not that concepts are bad or useless, but that they must always be subordinate to reality. The map serves the traveler only when the traveler is willing to put it down and look at the actual terrain. How many times have you been lost, not because you lacked knowledge, but because you trusted your knowledge more than your direct experience? How many times has the answer been right there, available to your immediate perception, but you could not see it because you were too busy consulting your map of how things should be? True wisdom knows when to put down the map. It knows when understanding has become an obstacle rather than a help. It knows when to stop figuring out and start noticing, when to stop analyzing and start listening. The river was always there. The student's knowledge did not make it appear. His sitting in not knowing did not create it. But his willingness to stop trusting his map and start trusting his direct perception allowed him to find what had been there all along. What river is running near you right now that you cannot hear because you are too busy consulting your map of where rivers should be? What is available in your immediate experience that you cannot access because your understanding of how things should be is drowning out your perception of how things actually are? The answer to your current dilemma might not lie in figuring it out, understanding it better, analyzing it more completely. The answer might lie in being quiet enough, still enough, present enough to notice what is actually here. Your breath is here. Your body is here. This moment is here. These are not concepts. These are not maps. These are the territory itself, and they are always more reliable than your thoughts about them. Let yourself rest in direct experience now. Feel breath without thinking about breath. Notice body without concepts about body. Be present to this moment without maps of what this moment should be. This is the ground of wisdom. Not what you know about reality, but reality itself, known directly, immediately, without the filter of understanding. Rest here. Let the maps dissolve. Let direct experience remain. Another story comes to meet you in the darkness. The tea master's single movement. In Kyoto, during the late 1600s, there lived a tea master named Senno Rikyu. His mastery of the tea ceremony was legendary. Daimyos and nobles sought his instruction. He had elevated the simple act of serving tea into an art form that expressed the deepest principles of Zen. One day, a famous samurai came to study with Rikyu. This samurai was skilled in many arts. He excelled in sword fighting, calligraphy, poetry, and strategy. He approached the tea ceremony with the same intensity he brought to all his pursuits, determined to master it quickly. Rikyu accepted him as a student. On the first day, the samurai arrived eager to learn. "Teach me the forms," he said. "Show me the proper movements. I will practice until I perfect them." Rikyu smiled. He prepared to make tea for his new student. The samurai watched with intense concentration, memorizing every gesture. The way Rikyu held the tea scoop, the angle at which he whisked the matcha, the precise placement of the bowl, the timing of each movement. After watching, the samurai practiced. He mimicked Rikyu's movements exactly. His muscle memory was excellent, trained through years of martial discipline. Within hours, his movements looked identical to his teacher's. "You are a quick student," Rikyu observed. "Your movements are technically perfect." The samurai bowed, pleased. "Then I am ready to perform the ceremony?" "No," Rikyu said gently. "You have learned the movements. You have not yet learned the tea ceremony." The samurai frowned. "But I have replicated every movement you made. What more is there?" Rikyu considered for a moment. Then he said, "Watch me again." He prepared tea once more. To the samurai, it looked identical to the first time. The same movements, the same timing, the same precision. "I see no difference," the samurai said. "That is the problem," Rikyu replied. "You are watching movements. You are not seeing the ceremony." Over the following weeks, the samurai practiced daily. His technique became flawless. Yet Rikyu continued to say he had not grasped the essence of the ceremony. The samurai grew frustrated. What was he missing? One morning, arriving early, the samurai found Rikyu alone in the tea room, preparing for his personal morning tea. No student to impress. No performance to give. Just the master and his tea. The samurai watched from the doorway, unseen. Rikyu's movements were the same movements he had taught. The same forms, the same precision, yet something was completely different. There was a quality of presence, a wholeness in each gesture, a way Rikyu seemed to disappear into the action itself. When Rikyu picked up the bamboo ladle, he was entirely the picking up of the ladle. When he whisked the tea, he was entirely the whisking. Nothing was performed. Nothing was demonstrated. Everything simply was. The samurai understood in that moment. He had been copying the outside of the movements while Rikyu was moving from the inside. The samurai was doing the tea ceremony. Rikyu was being the tea ceremony. The difference was everything. He stepped into the room. Rikyu looked up, unsurprised, and smiled. "Now you see," he said quietly. From that day, the samurai's practice changed. He stopped trying to perfect his movements and started bringing his whole being to each gesture. Stopped performing the forms and started inhabiting them. His technique remained the same, but something essential had shifted. Years later, when the samurai had become a tea master in his own right, a student asked him what Rikyu had taught him. He thought for a long time before answering. "Rikyu taught me that there is a difference between doing something correctly and being completely present while doing it. Between performing an action and becoming the action. Between technique and truth." This story speaks to the difference between technical understanding and embodied wisdom. Between knowing about something and knowing it through complete presence and participation. The samurai had understanding. He knew the forms. He could execute them perfectly. He had accumulated knowledge and could demonstrate competence. But this understanding existed on the surface, as something he possessed rather than something he was. Rikyu's mastery came from a different place. Not from having learned more forms or perfected more movements, but from bringing his complete presence to each moment of the ceremony. From disappearing into the action so completely that there was no separation between the doer and the doing. We face this same distinction in every area of life. You can know about meditation, understand the philosophy behind it, learn various techniques, explain it to others. Or you can sit down and actually meditate, bringing your whole being to the practice, not as something you do, but as something you are in those moments. The difference between these two is the difference between the samurai copying movements and Rikyu being present in them. One is accumulation. The other is presence. One is adding more. The other is being more fully here. Think about conversations. You can know the techniques of good listening. You can understand that you should make eye contact, nod appropriately, ask clarifying questions, not interrupt. You can execute all these behaviors perfectly while your mind is elsewhere, planning what you will say next, judging what you are hearing, waiting for your turn to speak. Or you can actually listen. Bring your complete presence to the other person. Not performing the movements of listening, but actually being present to what is being shared. The techniques might look the same from outside. The experience is entirely different. This is what the samurai saw when he watched Rikyu alone. The same movements he had been practicing, but inhabited differently. Not as forms to be executed, but as reality being lived. Not as actions separate from the actor, but as complete unity of being and doing. The path to this kind of presence cannot be learned as technique. You cannot add it to your collection of skills. It requires something else entirely. It requires letting go of the performance, the evaluation, the constant assessment of whether you are doing it right. When you are completely present to whisking tea, you are not thinking about whether you are whisking it correctly. You are not comparing your whisking to some ideal. You are not performing whisking for an imagined audience. You are simply whisking. Complete. Whole. Here. This is where understanding transforms into wisdom. When it stops being something you have and becomes something you are. When knowledge stops being a collection of information you carry and becomes the way you actually move through life. The samurai's frustration came from thinking there was something more to learn, some secret technique Rikyu was withholding. But there was nothing to add. There was everything to release. All the trying to do it right. All the self-consciousness. All the performance. All the separation between himself and the action. When all of that fell away, what remained was simple presence. And in that presence, the movements he had already learned became something entirely different. This is the journey from technique to mastery, from understanding to wisdom, from knowing about to being. It is not a journey of addition but of subtraction, not of learning more but of releasing what stands between you and complete presence. Right now, you are breathing. You can think about breathing, understand the mechanics of it, know about diaphragmatic breath versus shallow breath. Or you can simply breathe, completely present to the actual sensation of air moving in and out. Feel the difference. One is understanding breathing. The other is being breath. Same physical movement, entirely different experience. Wisdom is not adding more understanding to what you already know. Wisdom is bringing complete presence to what you are actually doing. Being here, fully, in each moment, in each movement, in each breath. Not performing life, being life. This is what Rikyu knew. This is what the samurai learned. This is what whispers beneath all these teachings. Be here, fully, now. Not thinking about being here, not trying to be here correctly, simply here, complete, whole. Your body knows how to rest. Your breath knows how to slow. Stop trying to make it happen and let it be happening. We continue deeper still into the heart of wisdom, the monk who forgot his name. In a remote monastery in the mountains of Tibet, there lived a very old monk. He had been at the monastery for so many years that no one could remember when he had arrived. He was simply part of the place, like the stone walls or the prayer flags. One morning, a young monk found the old one sitting in the courtyard, looking confused. "Grandfather," the young monk said respectfully. "Are you well?" The old monk looked up. His eyes were clear but puzzled. "I cannot remember my name," he said. The young monk was alarmed. "Should I call the abbot? Are you ill?" The old monk smiled, a gentle smile that held no distress. "I am not ill. I simply cannot remember my name. I know I had one. I remember people calling me by it. But when I search my mind for it, I find nothing." Word spread through the monastery. The abbot came to see him. "Try to remember," the abbot said. "Your name is..." The old monk held up his hand. "Please do not tell me. I am curious about this. What is it like to not know my own name?" Over the following days, other things began to slip away. The old monk forgot where he had been born. He forgot the names of the various positions he had held in the monastery. He forgot which lineage he belonged to, what year he had taken his vows, who his original teacher had been. The younger monks were frightened. They thought this was disease, the mind failing, a tragedy. They wanted to help him remember, to preserve what was being lost. But the old monk seemed remarkably peaceful. "It is interesting," he told them. "All these things I thought were me, they are gone. Yet I am still here. So perhaps they were never actually me." The abbot understood something the younger monks did not. He instructed them to leave the old monk alone, to let him be as he was. One day, the abbot sat with the old monk in the garden. "What remains?" he asked. The old monk considered. "I can still see these flowers. I can still feel the sun on my skin. I can still hear the wind in the prayer flags. I can still taste my tea. I can still know kindness when someone is kind to me. I can still sit. I can still breathe." "And what is missing?" the abbot asked. "The story," the old monk said. "The story of who I was, where I came from, what I accomplished, what I failed at, what I should be, what others think of me. All of that is missing, and I find I do not miss it." The abbot smiled. "What are you now? Without your story?" The old monk looked at his hands, weathered and wrinkled. He looked at the garden, lush after recent rain. He felt his breath moving. "I am just this," he said. "This seeing, this feeling, this breathing, this being alive, right now, without any name to call it." "And is this enough?" the abbot asked. "It is more than enough," the old monk replied. "It is everything." The old monk lived for several more years in this state. He never recovered his memories. His name, his history, his story, all remained lost. But he was present, joyful, and wise in a way that needed no memory to sustain it. When he finally died, peacefully in his sleep, the abbot said to the gathered monks, he spent his whole life practicing to let go of the self. In the end, the self let go of him. He showed us what remains when all the stories fall away. Just this. Just life itself, immediate and complete. This teaching points to something profound about the nature of identity and understanding. We think we are our stories, our names, our histories, our accomplishments, our failures, our roles, our relationships. We accumulate these things and we say, "This is who I am." But what the old monk discovered is that all of this is optional. It can be lost, and you still remain. The essential you, the awareness that sees and feels and experiences, that does not depend on any story. We carry our stories like weight. Every experience gets added to the narrative. Every event becomes part of the identity we are constructing. We work so hard to maintain this story, to keep it consistent, to defend it against challenges, to prove ourselves through it. But what if the story is not who you are? What if it is just something that has accumulated around who you actually are? What if losing it would not be a tragedy but a liberation? Think about how much energy you expend maintaining your self-concept, defending your reputation, trying to be consistent with who you have been, worrying about what others think, protecting your image. All of this effort goes into preserving a story. The old monk, losing his story piece by piece, discovered he did not need it. Without his name, he could still experience beauty. Without his history, he could still be present. Without his identity, he could still breathe, feel, perceive, be alive. This does not mean we should try to forget who we are. The old monk's forgetting was not intentional. It simply happened. But what we can learn from his experience is that our identity is not as essential as we think it is. You can be present to this moment without knowing your whole life story. You can experience kindness without your resume of accomplishments. You can feel the sun without your narrative of who you should be. In meditation, there are glimpses of this. moments when the story drops away. When you are not thinking about who you are or what this means or how you are doing, you are just present to breath, to sensation, to awareness itself. In those moments, something essential is revealed, something that does not depend on memory or identity or story. The younger monks thought the old monks' forgetting was loss. The abbot recognized it as gain. Not that the memories were bad, but that their absence revealed what had always been there beneath them. "What remains when the story falls away?" the old monk answered. "Just this. This immediate experience. This present moment. This being alive. And it is enough. It is everything. Your story is useful for navigating the world. You need to remember your name, your relationships, your responsibilities. But you are not your story. You are the awareness in which the story appears. You are what remains when the story is forgotten, even briefly. Right now, before you think about who you are, there is just this breath, this sensation, this awareness. Notice how it does not need a name, how it does not require a history, how it is complete without any story. This is your essential nature. Everything else is added. Useful, perhaps. Meaningful, certainly. But added, and therefore, not ultimately who you are. The old monk forgot his name and discovered his true nature. You do not need to forget. You just need to notice what is here before the story starts, beneath the identity, prior to the name. Just this. Nameless. Immediate. Complete. Let yourself rest in this nameless awareness now. Let your story quiet. Let your identity soften. Let yourself be what you are beneath all the accumulated narratives. Breathing. Aware. Alive. Nothing more needed. Another teaching arrives in the stillness. The carpenter's apprentice. In a small village in China, there was a master carpenter renowned for his beautiful work. His joints fit perfectly. His wood grain matched seamlessly. His furniture lasted for generations. People came from distant provinces to commission his work. A young man came to apprentice with this master. The young man was eager, intelligent, and ambitious. He wanted to learn everything as quickly as possible so he could start his own workshop. On the first day, the master gave him a piece of wood and a plane. "Make this smooth," he said. The apprentice worked for hours. When he showed his work to the master ran his hand over the wood. "Not smooth enough," he said. Again. The apprentice spent another day planing. Again, the master said it was not smooth enough. This continued for weeks. Just planing wood, making it smooth. The apprentice became frustrated. When would he learn to make furniture? Finally, the apprentice complained. "Master, I came here to learn carpentry, not to plane wood endlessly. When will you teach me real skills?" The master picked up a piece of wood the apprentice had worked on. He ran his own plane over it. Thin curls of wood fell away, perfectly consistent. The surface became like silk. "When you can do this," the master said, "then you are ready for the next lesson." Humbled, the apprentice returned to planing. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Gradually, his planing improved. The wood became smoother. The shavings became more consistent. But the master always found imperfections. One day, nearly a year after he had started, something shifted. The apprentice was not thinking about making smooth wood. He was not trying to impress the master. He was not wondering when he would be done. He was simply planing. His hands knew the angle. His body knew the rhythm. His attention was completely absorbed in the feel of the blade meeting wood. When the master checked his work that evening, he nodded. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will learn to cut joints." The apprentice was elated. Finally, real carpentry. But the next day, he received a piece of wood and was told to practice cutting straight lines. Just straight lines. Over and over. For months. Again, frustration built. Again, the master was never satisfied. Again, the apprentice wanted to complain. But this time, he remembered the planing. He settled into the practice. Weeks passed. Then one day, the same shift happened. He was not trying to cut straight lines. He was cutting. His saw knew the wood. His body knew the movement. His attention was complete. This pattern continued for 3 years. Each fundamental skill practiced until it was not just learned, but embodied. Until the apprentice was not thinking about doing it, but simply doing it. Until technique became nature. After 3 years, the master finally said, "Now you are ready to make furniture." The apprentice picked up his tools. He approached a piece of wood, and he realized something extraordinary. He did not need to think about how to make furniture. His hands knew. His body knew. Every fundamental skill, practiced for months until it was completely integrated, now worked together naturally. He did not plan the joints. They emerged correctly from his trained hands. He did not think about smoothness. The wood became smooth through his embodied practice. He did not follow a mental image of what he was making. The furniture appeared through the seamless flow of all he had integrated. Years later, when the apprentice had become a master himself and students came to him, he remembered his own impatience. He remembered wanting to skip the fundamentals, to get to the real work, to make impressive things quickly. And he remembered what the old master had taught him without words, that mastery is not about knowing more techniques, but about embodying basic practices so completely that they become invisible. That wisdom is not accumulation, but integration. That understanding becomes real only when it is no longer something you think about, but simply the way you move through the world. This story reveals a truth about how real understanding develops. We want to skip to the advanced teachings, the impressive techniques, the complex insights. We think wisdom lies in accumulating more knowledge, learning more sophisticated practices. But real wisdom comes from embodying simple truths so completely that they become our nature. From practicing basic awareness until presence becomes natural. From working with fundamental principles until they are not things we remember to do, but simply how we are. Think about your own spiritual practice or personal growth work. How often do you seek new techniques, new teachings, new approaches, while the fundamentals remain only partially integrated? How often do you want to move to advanced practices while your basic meditation is still something you have to force yourself to do? The apprentice wanted to make furniture before he knew how to make wood smooth. We want to achieve enlightenment before we can be present for 5 minutes. We want deep wisdom before we have embodied simple kindness. We want advanced understanding before we can sit with our own discomfort. But mastery does not work that way. Wisdom does not accumulate that way. Deep understanding comes not from collecting more, but from going deeper into less. From taking simple practices and embodying them so completely that they transform from techniques you apply to truths you live. The master made the apprentice plane wood for a year, not because planing was important in itself, but because the apprentice needed to learn how to learn. He needed to discover that real skill comes not from understanding a technique, but from practicing it until the understanding becomes embodied, until mind and body and action become one. When the apprentice finally made furniture, he did not think his way through it. All his practice had been integrated. The furniture emerged naturally from his trained hands, trained eyes, trained understanding that lived in his body and not just his mind. This is what spiritual practice can become. Not a collection of techniques you remember to apply, but a way of being that emerges naturally from deep integration of simple truths. Not something you do, but something you are. How do you get there? The same way the apprentice did. Pick a simple practice. Stay with it. Not for a week or a month, but until it transforms from something you do to something you are. Until presence is not a technique you remember, but your natural state. Until kindness is not a practice you apply, but how you instinctively respond. Until awareness is not something you cultivate, but what you are. This takes patience. It takes humility. It takes willingness to stay with what seems too simple, too basic, too repetitive. It takes trust that depth, not breadth, is the path to real understanding. The apprentice learned that 1 year of planing wood was more valuable than 10 years of superficial knowledge about many techniques. One fundamental skill, deeply embodied, is worth more than 100 techniques partially understood. What is your planing wood? What simple practice, if you actually embodied it completely, would transform everything? What basic principle, if it became your nature rather than your idea, would change how you move through life? Find it. Stay with it. Not until you understand it, but until you are it. Not until you can explain it, but until you cannot not do it. This is the path to wisdom that lasts. Understanding that transforms. Mastery that serves. Your breath right now. Could anything be more simple? Could anything be more fundamental? You have been breathing your whole life. Yet can you be completely present to this breath? This one breath. With total attention. This is your planing wood. This is your fundamental practice. This breath, complete presence, again and again, until presence is not something you achieve, but what you are. Rest now in the simplicity of what is always here. No need for anything complex. Just this breath, just this moment. Simple, fundamental, complete. Let us continue. The scholar's empty library. There was once a scholar who had dedicated his life to collecting and studying books. His library contained thousands of volumes from every tradition, every philosophy, every school of thought. He could quote from any text. He could compare and contrast different teachings. His knowledge was vast and comprehensive. One day, a fire swept through his house while he was away. When he returned, he found everything destroyed. His library, his life's work, every book he had collected over 40 years, all turned to ash. The scholar fell to his knees among the ruins. He wept. How could he continue his work without his books? How could he teach without his references? What was he now? Without his library? Days passed. The scholar sat among the ashes, unable to move forward. His identity had been built on his collection. his knowledge, his ability to reference and cite and explain. All of that was gone. A former student came to visit, bringing food. She found the scholar sitting in what had been his library, staring at nothing. "I have lost everything," the scholar told her. The student sat beside him. "May I ask you a question?" she said gently. The scholar nodded. "You taught me about impermanence," she said. "You explained how everything changes, how nothing can be held onto, how attachment causes suffering. You quoted from a dozen different texts about this truth." "Yes," the scholar said bitterly. "I taught those words. I did not truly understand them." "But now?" the student asked. The scholar was silent for a long time. Then something shifted in his face. "Now," he said slowly, "I understand impermanence not because I read about it, but because I am experiencing it. Not as a concept, but as reality." He looked at the ashes surrounding them. "For 40 years, I studied teachings about the nature of attachment. I could explain perfectly how clinging creates suffering. But I was clinging the entire time. Clinging to my books, my knowledge, my identity as a scholar. I was explaining freedom while remaining bound." The student waited, letting him continue. "The books are gone," the scholar said. "But I can still remember many of the teachings. Not word for word, perhaps, but the essential truths. And I realized those truths were never in the books. They were in my understanding, and my understanding was never dependent on the books. I only thought it was." He stood up, brushing ash from his robes. "All these years, I thought I was studying wisdom, but I was collecting information about wisdom. Now, with nothing left to collect, nothing left to reference, nothing left to prove myself through, I might finally have a chance to actually be wise rather than just knowledgeable about wisdom." In the months that followed, the scholar's teaching changed completely. He stopped quoting texts. He spoke from direct experience. He talked about what he had actually understood through living, not what he had read in books. Students noticed the difference. His teaching became clearer, more direct, more useful. Before, he had been like a chef describing meals he had never tasted. Now he was someone sharing food he had actually eaten. One day, a wealthy patron offered to help rebuild his library. "I will buy you whatever books you want," the patron said. "You can recreate your collection." The scholar thought about this. Then he smiled. "Thank you," he said. "But I think I will keep a small library. A few essential texts. I no longer need thousands of books." I mistook the pointing fingers for the moon. I confused the menu with the meal. I thought wisdom was something I could collect and store. Now I know it is something I must live. This teaching speaks directly to the trap of confusing knowledge about wisdom with wisdom itself, of mistaking understanding concepts for understanding reality, of thinking that accumulating information is the same as developing insight. The scholar's library represented years of study, but it also represented a barrier. As long as he had his books, he could always reference them instead of trusting his own direct understanding. He could always hide behind citations instead of speaking from experience. He could always collect more instead of embodying what he already knew. The fire, tragic as it seemed, removed this barrier. It forced him to rely on what he actually understood rather than what he had collected. It revealed that his true wisdom was not in the books, but in what he had genuinely integrated through his study. We do this in different ways. We collect teachings like the scholar collected books. We gather quotes, attend workshops, read books, listen to podcasts. We accumulate information about meditation, about presence, about wisdom. We can explain these concepts perfectly. We can describe practices we have never embodied. We can teach truths we have not lived. And we think this accumulation is progress. We think knowing about something is the same as knowing it. We confuse the map for the territory once again, the description for the experience, the word for the reality. But wisdom is not information. Understanding is not collection. Real insight cannot be stored in books or files or saved quotes. It can only live in how you actually move through life, how you respond to challenges, how you are when no one is watching. The scholar discovered that losing his books did not mean losing his wisdom. What he had genuinely understood remained. What he had merely collected was gone. The fire separated actual integration from accumulated information. You do not need to lose your books or your notes or your saved articles to learn this lesson. You can recognize now the difference between what you have collected and what you have integrated, between what you know about and what you actually understand. Ask yourself, could you lose all your resources, all your saved wisdom, all your collected teachings, and still access what you truly understand? What would remain if you could not reference anything external? What wisdom lives in you not as stored information but as embodied truth? This is not to say study is useless. The scholar's years of reading gave him material to work with. But the value was not in the collection, but in what he integrated from it. The books were fingers pointing at the moon. They served their purpose when they helped him see the moon. But he mistook the fingers for the destination. True wisdom shows up not in what you can cite, but in how you live. Not in what you have read, but in how you respond to the moment before you. Not in your collection of teachings, but in your capacity to be present, kind, aware, real. The scholar became a better teacher after the fire, not because he knew more, but because he stopped hiding behind what he knew. He spoke from genuine understanding rather than from reference, from integration rather than collection, from being rather than having. You already know so much. But how much of what you know have you actually integrated? How much lives in you as real understanding versus how much exists as collected information you think you should remember? Let go of the collection. Trust what remains. Speak from what you have genuinely understood through living, not from what you have gathered from others. This is the wisdom that is actually yours. This is the understanding that can guide you when all references are gone. Right now, there are no books to consult, no teachings to reference. Just this moment and your direct experience of it. This is the only library you actually need. Everything essential is here. Everything true is available. Not as information, but as immediate reality. Rest in what is actually here rather than what you have collected thoughts about. This is enough. This is everything. Another teaching waits. The abbot's final teaching. In an old monastery, an abbot was dying. He had been the spiritual leader of this community for 30 years. Everyone respected him. Everyone loved him. His wisdom had guided countless students. As he lay on his deathbed, the monks gathered around him. They wanted his final teaching, his ultimate wisdom, the most important lesson he could share before he left them. The eldest monk spoke. "Master, you have taught us so much. But now, at the end of your life, having walked the path completely, what is the most important truth? What should we remember above all else? The abbot looked at each of them with eyes still clear despite his failing body. He opened his mouth to speak, but instead of words, a small sound came out, almost a laugh. The monks leaned closer. Had they misheard? Their beloved teacher was laughing in his final moments? The abbot smiled. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "I don't know," he said. The monks looked at each other, confused and distressed. Their master was delirious. The pain had affected his mind. He did not know what he was saying. But the abbot saw their confusion and shook his head slightly. "No," he whispered. "Listen, I truly do not know. And this not knowing is the most important thing I can share with you." The eldest monk leaned even closer. "Master, we do not understand." The abbot closed his eyes, gathering strength. When he opened them again, they were clear and present. "For 30 years, he said slowly, you asked me questions, and I gave you answers. You thought I knew. I thought I knew. But now, at the end, I see clearly. I never knew. I only thought I knew." He paused, breathing with effort. "What is Buddha nature?" I answered with words I learned from my teachers. But did I truly know what happens after death? I spoke with confidence based on texts and teachings. But did I truly know? How should you live your lives? I gave guidance drawn from scriptures and experience. But did I truly know what was right for each of you? The monks sat in stunned silence. All this time, the abbot continued, I spoke from wisdom I had gathered from others, from texts, from tradition. And this has value. It is not wrong, but it is not the same as truly knowing. Now, about to cross the final threshold, I see that I have been describing a country I never visited. I have been pointing at a moon I assumed was there because others told me about it. He smiled again, and this time there was no sadness in it, only clarity. And this is okay. This is perfect. Because the greatest wisdom is recognizing the limits of your wisdom. The deepest understanding is knowing what you do not understand. The truest teaching is admitting you do not know. One of the younger monks found courage to speak. Then, Master, how should we teach? If we admit we do not know, how can we guide others? The abbot's eyes brightened. Teach from honesty. Teach from your actual experience, not from what you think you should know. When you do not know, say so. When you share teachings from tradition, be clear, they are not your direct knowledge, but wisdom you have received. And always, always remain curious. Always stay open to discovering you were wrong about what you thought you knew. His breath was becoming shallower. The pretense of knowing, this causes so much harm. Leaders who cannot admit uncertainty. Teachers who cannot say they do not know. We cause suffering when we present our limited understanding as complete truth. We create rigidity when we defend positions we are not actually certain about. He looked at each monk again. I am dying, and I do not know what comes next. For 30 years, I spoke about death and rebirth with confidence. But honest, I do not know. I believe. I hope. I have faith in the teachings, but I do not know with certainty. And you know what? A peace settled over his features. This not knowing is more honest than all my years of speaking as if I knew. This uncertainty is more truthful than my confident teachings. This humility is closer to wisdom than my accumulated knowledge ever was. His voice dropped to nearly nothing. The monks had to lean very close to hear. Do not fear not knowing. Do not rush to fill it with false certainty. The admission that you do not know is the beginning of real wisdom. The acknowledgement of uncertainty is more honest than pretending you are sure. These were his final words. He closed his eyes. His breathing slowed, and then stopped. He was gone. The monks sat with his teaching. At first, it felt like they had lost something. If their master, after 30 years of practice, did not know, what hope did they have? But gradually, they began to understand the gift he had given them. He had freed them from the pretense of certainty. He had shown them that wisdom is not having all the answers, but being honest about what you actually know versus what you think you should know. His final teaching, I don't know, was more valuable than all his previous teachings combined. Because it was completely true. Because it was absolutely honest. Because it opened a door to genuine inquiry instead of closing discussion with false certainty. This story brings us to the edge of wisdom itself. To the recognition that real understanding includes acknowledging its own limits. That the deepest truth is often, I don't know. We live in a culture that demands certainty. We are supposed to have opinions on everything. We are expected to know, to be sure, to defend our positions. Admitting uncertainty is seen as weakness. But what if the opposite is true? What if pretending certainty about things you are not actually certain about is the weakness? What if admitting I don't know is the strength? Think about your own life. How many positions do you defend without actually being certain? How many beliefs do you hold because you think you are supposed to hold them, not because you have directly verified their truth? How often do you speak with confidence about things you have not directly experienced? The abbot's final teaching was radical honesty. After 30 years of teaching, he admitted he had been pointing at truth without actually possessing it with certainty. He had faith. He had belief. He had hope. He had received wisdom from others. But he did not have the kind of direct, certain knowledge he had implied in his teaching. This does not mean his teaching was worthless. It means it was limited, as all teaching is. It means the truth in it came from tradition and experience, not from complete certainty. And acknowledging this limitation makes it more true, not less. You do not know what happens after death. You might have beliefs. You might have faith. You might have reasons to think one thing is more likely than another. But actual knowing? No. And admitting this is not failure. It is honesty. You do not know if you are doing the right thing with your life. You are doing the best you can with what you understand. But certainty? No. And admitting this is not weakness. It is truth. You do not know if your way of seeing things is correct. You have perspective based on your experience. But knowing that your perspective is right and others are wrong? No. And admitting this is not confusion. It is wisdom. The pretense of knowing causes harm. It creates rigidity. It stops inquiry. It makes us defend positions instead of exploring truth. It turns dialogue into debate, curiosity into certainty, openness into closure. The admission of not knowing opens everything. It invites exploration. It maintains flexibility. It keeps us curious. It allows us to learn from everyone because we are not pretending we already know everything. This is the deepest wisdom, knowing the difference between what you actually know and what you think you know, between direct experience and received belief, between certainty and confidence, between understanding and speculation. Rest now in not knowing. Let yourself release the burden of having to be certain. Let yourself admit, even just to yourself, how much you do not actually know. Feel the relief in this honesty. Feel the freedom in this release. You do not need to know. You just need to be present, to be honest, to stay curious, to keep exploring. This is enough. Let sleep come now, gentle and complete, into the vast space of not knowing where all wisdom begins. We have journeyed together through 20 stories tonight, each one pointing toward the same truth from different angles. Wisdom is not what we accumulate, but what we uncover. Understanding is not something we achieve, but something we allow. Like the golden Buddha beneath the clay, wisdom has been there all along, waiting for us to recognize it. Like the cracked pot watering flowers, our imperfections create unexpected beauty. Like Tanzan setting down the woman, wisdom knows when to release what we are carrying. Each story offers the same essential teaching: be present, be honest, let go of pretense, see clearly what is actually here. This is enough. This has always been enough. As you drift into sleep now, let all these teachings dissolve into the simplicity they point toward. You do not need to remember every story. You do not need to hold on to every lesson. Let it all settle into your heart, working in ways you do not need to understand. Tomorrow, when you wake, you may notice you see things slightly differently. Small shifts in how you respond to life. This is how wisdom works, changing us gently from within, not through force, but through understanding that seeps into our bones. If these stories brought you peace, if they helped you rest, feel free to like this video and subscribe to this channel. More than anything, I hope you sleep deeply. I hope you wake with fresh eyes. I hope you carry these teachings lightly. You are enough, exactly as you are. Your life is unfolding exactly as it should. Everything you need to know is available in each present moment, if you can stay present enough to see it. Rest well, dear friend. May you sleep without disturbance. May you wake refreshed. May wisdom continue to unfold in you, natural as breath, constant as your beating heart. Good night.